Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Collision will begin in 5 minutes. Please welcome to the stage CEO and co-founder of Collision and Web Summit, Paddy Cosgrave.
Morning, guys. I hope everybody had a great night. You're very welcome back to the second day. We've got some fantastic talks, not just here, but right across all of our stages. So I hope you're going to have a great day. What do athletes, venture capitalists, and strategic area experts have in common? A shared goal of an accelerator to extend beyond funding. Hear from the players and partners behind this endeavor. Learn why athletes are getting into technology and investing, and how this accelerator is designed to benefit NFL players. Please welcome our athletes and entrepreneurs to the stage in conversation with the absolutely wonderful Kurt Wagner of Recode.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here to start today off. Good morning to you guys.
Good morning.
How y'all doing? I should have known NFL guys wearing jackets. I'm up here looking sloppy with my my T-shirt. So we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff today around kind of the future of technology relating to sports, safety, investing for players. But I think it would be helpful maybe to describe very briefly how the three of you kind of work together and what this kind of one team collective actually is, because it's relatively new, right? It's from just at the end of last year.
Yep,
so
we launched in December.
Do you want to maybe give us a quick spiel on what you guys do?
Sure. I run the commercial business for the NFL Players Association. So we do all the licensing and marketing of players, video games, apparel, trading cards, collectibles, that sort of thing. And we've done that for about 25 years. And so over the last few years, we've been trying to think about new areas to go into, and that led us into a series of conversations with venture capital funds and some academic institutions and some corporate partners about what is going on in the venture space and how it relates to sports and sports technology. And what we ended up with is our twist on a venture capital fund or an accelerator, which launched in December, called the One Team Collective. And Isaiah, to my right, and Marcus on the end here, are both on our athlete advisory board. It's a mix of current and former NFL players who are helping us test out new technology from the vantage of both athletes and as business people, folks who have participated in deals and invested in deals. And we're really super lucky to have these guys as engaged as they have been.
So you guys are basically identifying startups similar to how any investor might, and offering a bunch of different kind of services and connections, right? Either be it to players, current or former, other, Isaiah, you have a marketing, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing, because it's more on the marketing analytics side of all this stuff.
Yeah, so as Ahmad said, I'm on the athlete advisory board, but I also sit in a unique position. I'm also on the board for the One Team Collective. So I started the company. I started investing when I was a player. I ended up playing 8 years. I've now made over 20 investments in tech, biotech, and been an investor as well as an entrepreneur. My latest company is called the Sports Innovation Lab, and we launched that. It's a sports market research and analysis arm. So it's a highly fragmented market, a lot of confusion in the marketplace, and what we've done is really look at the landscape and organize it across 30 different segments. So that was a natural fit for the One Team Collective to help survey the landscape and understand what the competitive landscape looks like and where the opportunity lies to really help be an arm. And we've got a pretty large customer base as it is right now, but really seeing sports as a way to start a much larger story. Quantified athlete is an extension of quantified self, a $1 trillion industry, which will be. And we're really at the tip of the iceberg with that. Smart venue is really smart city and IoT, right? It's a testing ground for that. So a much larger story, and we've got early success. Obviously, one of our early clients is Gatorade, NFLPA, IBM, Google, Intel. So we've got a really great list, and really helping to navigate that space is not easy. And saw really a need in the market, and tried to build over a year vetting over now 2,000 companies globally.
Got it.
Not just a U.S. thing, but global.
So companies that come through this accelerator, they get to work with folks like yourself. They get access to players like Marcus and other NFL folks. Marcus, like you were telling me a little bit backstage that you've been doing some advising of tech companies. How common is it for current NFL players to get involved in investing on the side when they're not playing? And, you know, I guess, are you advising other players as a member of this kind of council? Are you helping your fellow colleagues in the NFL make these kinds of decisions, or who helps you guys with this?
Yeah, I think over the last handful of years, you've seen more and more athletes get involved in the investment world, specifically in the sports tech world. And I think it lends itself to an opportunity to get involved into an industry where you come in and kind of an industry leader or an expert in a lot of ways. And I've been investing since 2012. I've helped to run an athlete-led angel investment group out of New York, and slowly transitioned into the consulting side just because I saw an avenue to really get on the ground level with some of these startup companies and these early stage companies that didn't necessarily involve cutting a check. And I think the more that you see athletes, influencers get involved in the space, I think you'll start to see more and more iterations of you know, those guys getting involved at different stages of companies.
How do you make sure that folks are making wise financial decisions? And obviously, you can't control what someone does with their money, but you guys both played in the NFL. You obviously work closely with athletes. Once you get money, people like to come and pitch their wonderful ideas to you. So, how do you know? I think in the past, it sounds like people would invest in like. How do you continue to like vet those types of companies? Is that something that maybe this incubator is intended to help with, or how do you make sure that people are kind of making wise decisions when it comes to investing?
I mean, I can start with that. I think one of the biggest things, and I know Marcus, I know you do this as well at Ahmad, you do it just de facto, which is help give advice, guys transitioning, guys playing across a variety of sports as well. The biggest thing I always like to say is you have to go in, regardless of what it is, even if it's a restaurant or a car dealership, you have to go in and learn everything you possibly can learn about that. Talk to as many people as you can, and you have to live it. You don't just throw your money over a wall and just say, hey, you know, forget about it, it's going to be there. And before even deploying that capital, make sure you spend a lot of the time with the people themselves, right? Know the space, know the competitive landscape, know the people. And when you do that and you feel like you've got enough really, really smart people around you that validate what you see, you start to learn and you start to pick up patterns over time. But that doesn't happen overnight. Just like it didn't happen overnight getting to the NFL. That's the thing you continue to say. There's an education piece here that you can't just, hey, you know, go around it and hey, let's just get lucky. It's not like that. You got to dive in, you know, head first and get your hands dirty and learn everything from the ground up.
This has to kind of be a player-to-player thing, though, right? I believe the NFLPA can't necessarily get super involved in the way athletes spend their money, or can you guys?
Yeah, we're never going to be in the business of telling players what to invest in or what not to invest in, unless it's some sort of fraudulent Ponzi scheme. But I mean, the thing that we will try to do, just to add on to Isaiah's point about education, I think it is important for athletes to get educated. I also think we need to be realistic that nobody is going to learn all of it. Yeah. And no investor, professional investor, tries to do that. So part of what we try to do is connect our athletes with people like Kleiner Perkins and Madrona and Intel and BlackRock, all of whom are happy to meet with athletes and hear their perspective and just meet with them. And so you can learn, you can draft off of that as an athlete. And so I think sending that message to our members is important because, you know, I was always the guy in college that if you went to lecture and took notes, I would ask you for your notes. It's inefficient for both of us to take notes. Why would we do that? So there's a bit of that going on with what we're trying to do with our members, is to say, look, yes, you should absolutely learn it. You have to know the basics. There's no way around that. But don't put it all on yourself, because venture and investing, those sound cool, but they are absolutely the modern day equivalents of the car washes, the dry cleaners, the restaurants. And it in a lot of ways, especially when people's families and friends get involved, can very, very easily lead to failure.
Marcus, when you look at the opportunities that athletes have to do kind of endorsements, to be the face of a company, a product, whatever it may be. There's obviously the big ones, the Nikes and Gatorades of the world, but we're talking now about kind of maybe up and coming, the next whatever it may be. Is this incubator an opportunity for folks like yourself or others in the NFL to kind of get in on the ground floor of someone like that? Is that how you see this, or what's the role for a player in terms of making this an endorsement option?
I kind of view it in a lot of ways as kind of the new age endorsement. You know, your traditional endorsements, your Gatorades of the world, your Nikes of the world, you kind of plug into a massive machine already, and you know, they're able to utilize your brand to drive value for those guys. But I think once you're able to get in on the ground level and you're able to participate in the upside of that brand and that value creation, I think that's a totally different beast, and I think that's part of the intrigue that you see with athletes and influencers getting involved in the investment world.
Is there any hesitation or concern when you're dealing with a technology that maybe won't pan out, right? I mean, as you mentioned, a lot of really successful investors, they still lose a lot of money, and they make bets that don't work, right? So is there a concern of saying, well, I like this technology, but I'm afraid of, you know, Marcus Colston being the face of this watch that's going to, you know, be a flop in 2 years or anything? Or can you really think of it like that?
No, I mean, that's to piggyback on these guys' points, that's part of the education process. The thing that you'll quickly realize is there's no shortage of opportunities.
Sure.
The more that you can educate yourself on the actual industry that you're entering into, the actual business, the product, and the team behind that product is probably the most important piece. The more that you can educate yourself, you know, around all these factors, I mean, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah.
And I just want to add to that. I think what Marcus just said right there, jumping that chasm from endorsement to actual business partner is where I know a lot of guys, if they want to put the work in, it can go. And it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of smart people around you to help guide you there. But you absolutely can, from being just a marketing play to actually being a part of the business and drive strategy and growth. And again, I always like to say, and I talk to players, like all those amazing things that got you to an elite level of playing, those all transfer to business. You just got to point them in the right direction. You have to bring that passion with you.
Yeah.
And you have to find those things in business or whatever else you're going to do that you're going to be passionate about. And you know, I couldn't agree more on that. And you become a true business partner rather than just a kind of a marketing play.
And I think it's fair to say that, you know, when it's technology and venture, there's still a lot of parallels to traditional business. Like, there's plenty of T-shirt companies that came along and fell by the wayside.
Sure.
That we've worked with in the past. There's plenty of companies that have had new products that wanted us to work with them or players to work with them. And it sort of depends. I mean, you could be a Tom Brady where you're pretty selective and you only work with blue chip brands, and then you could be somebody more like Peyton Manning, who was much more open, or Drew Brees, much more open with the type and the number of companies that he wanted to work with. And if you look back, you know, LeBron James 10 years ago decides to work with Beats, and Beats was nothing at the time.
Yeah.
And you might think, well, why does the world need another headphone company? Yet now everybody knows what it is, and it obviously had a happy ending. And even before that, Vitamin Water and you know, people outside the sports industry with, like, you know, musicians and entertainers and, you know, folks like 50 Cent working with them. I think those are all examples that worked out, but there were obviously plenty of examples in those categories that didn't.
But I also say this, and this is part of the beauty of the one team. There's only so many LeBron Jameses. There's only so many Drew Breeses. Right? I was a grinder. I was never a superstar. I was always going to be a role player, so I had to find where I could fit in and kind of build it from the ground up. And you're going to start to see that more and more and more to be able to grow that. And you know, the fact is One Team Collective represents all players, and the ability to do that in a highly nimble and agile way with earlier stage companies is a truly innovative vehicle in and of itself.
Yeah. I think my favorite is Marshawn Lynch doing the local plumbing company in Seattle. Beacon Plumbing. I'll never forget. That was pretty good. So you only have this incubator. I'm kind of envisioning, we're obviously talking about tech here, but I'm also kind of envisioning health and safety as being a priority, especially given where we're at with the NFL today, right? It's obviously a dangerous sport, a lot of injuries. Is that a focus for you guys when you think, who are we going to let into this whole thing?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely a focus. It's also an opportunity. Our first deal that we announced last week was with a wearable company called Whoop.
Which you're wearing.
I'm wearing it right here, trying to be a good spokesman. So it looks sort of like a Fitbit, but it's really designed to be to help athletes maximize their recovery, and it focuses on things like strain and sleep and how different aspects of their day-to-day life and workouts impact those metrics. So the nice thing is, for a first deal, it was interesting from an investment standpoint. It was interesting from a marketing standpoint. They have a product at retail. But then from a data and a health and safety and kind of helping players in the off-season, part of the deal is that every player gets one and gets kind of this tailored experience with the company to be able to interpret the data and translate that into actionable activity during the day for them to tweak and maximize their workouts.
But that drives off a much larger trend as well, right? So initially targeted at the elite athletes, but really relevant to all of us. In the end, we all want to feel our best. And you started to see, I don't know if you've seen a couple commercials out there, but like the idea of an elite athlete is really no different than what I am now, which is Joey Bag of Donuts businessman. It doesn't matter. I want to feel my best if I have a huge meeting. How can I actually put that together and gather data to really put together essentially a blueprint to help do that?
This whole like data influencing your workout, it's not totally new, but it's still pretty new, right? Like I remember it was just a couple years ago, a bunch of the combine guys were doing these camps before the combine to add a 1/10 of a second to their 40 time or whatever, and they were using all kinds of wearables to do that. Marcus, how much do you guys actually use this stuff as a team, like as a league right now, versus is it just something that you wear in the off season and kind of do on your own?
I think a lot of guys use it more so in the off season, because if you look at the wearables market as a whole, a lot of it is kind of one-to-one, like the Fitbits, like the Whoops. But I think with that market exploding the way that it has, I think you're starting to see people really progress in the space and get to a place where you can actually see actionable insights.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really going to drive the market is if I can use this technology and this data to kind of tell me what I need to be doing as opposed to what I just did, I think you'll start to see it get incorporated more and more, on a team level.
Do you feel like it actually helps from your experience using it? Like, does it, I don't know, do you feel more rested, or do you say, oh, I was tired today and I saw that in my numbers, I need to change my diet or my sleep or whatever?
Yeah, I think as a whole, whenever you have objective data driving, decisions and driving actions, you start to feel that impact a little bit more. You kind of get away from, the look test and how you feel, and you start to really get to a place where you can predict what's coming down the pike.
Yeah. Isaiah, do you wish you had this when you were playing? Did they have anything like this a couple years ago?
Yeah, I talk about this all the time. I was trying to be a quantified athlete with pencil and piece of paper, guessing on a variety of different things, and you couldn't have said it any better. We're at the tip of the iceberg of being able to quantify and essentially change the probability that you can feel your best when your best is needed, right? Yeah. So from hydration to nutrition to energy expenditure, you name it, you go down to sleep. I mean, you go name it, start to dial these things in, customized for you. We are at the cusp of that, and the wearables market is also at the cusp of being able to gather unique, novel, accurate data sets to then really tell that story, to then take advantage of the capability getting built out in other industries. And you guys are going to make you sick to hear this again. Machine learning, deep learning, AI, the ability to take advantage of those capabilities being built out in a major way on the human body is really, really going to be a massive, massive market.
So you got a smartwatch, or a fitness tracker. Whoop is kind of the first. What else are you guys looking at? I mean, what can you tell us about where?
We've got 300 companies that have applied since December when we launched the One Team Collective.
All sports tech related?
No, we've got consumer products that are like headphones, right? Yep. Unbranded. They just want marketing support. we have a lot of food and beverage companies that are kind of designed to, you know, maximize, be healthy versions of, you know, the bag of donuts. Maybe it's the bag of organic wheat donuts.
Yeah.
It just sounds awful in the morning. But you know, we've been really pleasantly surprised with the mix of companies, and just on the data and the health and safety stuff. I mean, we talk about while they're playing. Both of these guys are not playing anymore, but you know, we think about how can we help the athletes transition from playing. We want them to maximize their career in a safe way, but then also be able to live the rest of their lives,
right.
And hope those lives are as long as possible, and live them in the best way possible. And at the end of the day, what all of the stuff we're trying to do with our players and our members is we want them to get more out of football than football got out of them. And so that lasts well beyond their playing careers. And I think what we're doing with the One Team Collective helps do that, hopefully.
Yeah. We got like 30 seconds, and then Brian said he was going to come tackle us off stage. But question for the two football guys here. Is there a food that you, like a secret food, a secret drink that you like? Are you guys doing those hand-pressed juices that Silicon Valley costs $400 to buy the machine or anything? What's the secret?
I'm kind of telling myself right now, I'm fresh out of football, so my secret foods aren't very good right now.
Okay.
I make my own. I'm pretty old school. I make my own smoothies at home.
Wow.
With, you know, frozen fruit, some fresh fruit.
Probably
or
use
whatever.
a blender too instead of.
Yes, my wife's out here in the audience. She's still upset. I don't clean it every single morning.
You'll get there eventually. Fellas, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Appreciate
Thank you.
Hi everyone. So my name is Mike Harvey. I'm head of comms here at Collision and Web Summit. Thanks very much for being here. I hope you had a good time last night out on the streets of New Orleans. I hope you're down at Fulton Alley. A lot of people were. We've got a lot of stuff coming up this morning. We've got a spaceman. We're going to talk about fake news. We're going to talk about sports. We'll continue the sports theme right now. So. Doping in sports, it's a big deal. There's a lot of controversy out there, and there's a lot of action. There's a lot of technology behind how we fix doping in sports. So right now we've got some people right at the heart of some of those controversies. We've got Alison Wagner, the Olympic swimming medalist. We've got the CEO of USADA, Travis Tygart, and they're in conversation with the editor-in-chief of SB Nation, Eleanor Bergeron. Please welcome them on stage.
Good morning.
Morning.
I love having a panel this early in the day. So I wanted to kick this off since I have you two experts here, but I'm going to start with a really dumb question, especially from y'all perspective. As a fan and as a viewer of sports, I kind of always wonder, what is so bad about doping? Like, I want to see people jump higher, run faster, swim faster. I want to see records broken. It's exciting to me to think about people reaching the height of what their potential could be. And so from my perspective, as somebody that has no health implications from doping, like, as a viewer, why should I care whether or not people dope?
Go ahead, Alison.
Well, you know, there are rules of play, and doping kind of, in my mind, goes under that umbrella. So there are reasons those rules are in place. Doping, many banned performance-enhancing drugs are dangerous to a person's health. People don't all have access to these drugs, so it would be an unfair playing field.
Yeah, I guess I would just echo. I mean, I think it's a really important question that I sometimes will get from the taxi driver or the bartender, right? Like, why do we care? And I think if you stripped away that rule, and so it's not cheating, it is entertainment, they're adults. From our perspective, I think there's 4 natural outcomes that are totally bad for sport and bad for society. One, it wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be a level playing field because the drugs interact differently. The athletes themselves call it responders versus non-responders based solely on your makeup. And these are game-changing differences. I think number 2, all you do is draw the line in a different spot. Because if 100 milliliters of testosterone is okay for you from a health standpoint, but 200 is going to give you a performance advantage, which it will, then athletes are just going to, it's an arms race all over again. I think 3, you gotta ask yourself, and it's more of a philosophical question, what is sport? And we like the Tour de France or NFL football, not because it's machines or cyborgs. Now, there is esports, right, and there is NASCAR, but human competition is exactly that. It's not something that is, and maybe we're drawing different lines as society progresses. And then I guess just the 4th point that I would say is from, a trickle-down effect. If you have to do it to make a major league team, let's say, or a professional team, you're then going to have to do it to make a college team, which means you're going to have to do it to make a high school team. And, I've got 3 kids all who play at young ages. I don't want to have to make a decision to give my kids steroids or EPO or human growth hormone or insulin that would have negative consequences to their long-term health to make an 8-year-old soccer team. And I think, unfortunately, that's what you would see ultimately happen.
Yeah, so it's more looking at the whole approach and sort of the future of the sports and athletes themselves. From your perspective, because, you competed at the highest level there is, did you ever compete against people who you knew were doping or later found out to be doping?
Yeah, so I competed against different kinds of doping athletes. I competed against athletes who knew they were doping. I competed against athletes who were being doped and weren't aware of the fact that they were being doped.
How can you not be aware that you're being doped?
Well, on occasion, young athletes are given supplements, and they're not in a position in which they have outside influences. So they just do what their coaches tell them to do without question. And that takes many different forms. But people can be doped and not be aware of it, especially if they're doped from a very young age. So as you're older, if you are beginning doping and you're not aware of what you're taking, you may see changes in your body that seem unnatural. And in some cases, people say, well, maybe it is natural. And in some cases, people say, wait a second, something's going on here.
Yeah.
I would just, echo that that's a really important point. And we've seen in this Russia case, and we saw it a little bit in our Postal Services case, where the culture has put, to win, it's not just now win, it's win at all costs. And so the pressures that are put on, whether it's young athletes like swimmers and Allison sport, who can, peak at the age of 16, 17 sometimes, or you're a professional athlete, when the culture puts so much pressure on you to, break the rule. And let's be clear, there are rules, and sport is essentially, an agreement of the rules. So you're intentionally breaking the rule when you do it. And I think athletes have choices, but when the culture is such that puts so much pressure and essentially abuses athletes where they have no choice, we've experienced that in this Russia situation. And look, I think the state abused its own athletes by, they didn't tie them down and inject them with these dangerous drugs, but they gave them no other out. If they wanted to be employed, if they wanted to make a team, if they didn't want to, have to go right out of, as soon as they were old enough to walk, working at a manufacturing plant for the rest of their lives, if they wanted any choice at success on an international stage, they had to participate in the program. And that's a culture that, is unfortunate, is not fair, and that we should do, I think, everything to avoid that from happening.
Yeah, I'm so curious about what you said about that, because knowing how hard athletes train and just knowing that what we love about competition and seeing peak human performance, the community of athletes that, knows about each other and they compete and get to know, what you're eating, how you're training, one-upping each other in that level of competition. What does doping do to the athlete community? Because I'm imagining if you competed against people that didn't know they were doping and later figured it out, how does that affect your self-esteem or what you know about your own identity as an athlete?
Well, it taints the community. You know, I'd like to be a part of protecting what I think is so valuable about the Olympic movement, which is the Olympic spirit. And I define that as being pursuing excellence with integrity. And when you're in it, you feel much like I think a lot of the public felt in watching the Rio Games. You just feel like something as pure as that Olympic spirit shouldn't be tainted by something as dirty as a corrupt system allowing doping infractions to take place or not properly enforcing the rules. So it's upsetting. It destroys the faith that athletes have in the rules being upheld. It disturbs the dedication that athletes could be giving to their sport. People drop out. There's lots of things that happen as a result, but the overall message that is sent to everybody is that, okay, we're going to say that the system and the spirit is going to be protected, but then it's not.
Yeah. Gotcha. I'm also curious because, let's be frank, winning comes with benefits, especially within the Olympic model. You win a lot, you get a lot of medals, that increases your sponsorships, it puts you on a Wheaties box, that sort of thing. So from the perspective of an athlete who's clean, what is the cost to you of not doping?
Well, a lot. You know, personally, lost accomplishments. I would have had 3 more gold medals and another world record.
Wow.
Lost opportunities like sponsorships. You know, my situation was unique, but my college scholarship was removed because I won a silver medal and not a gold.
Wow.
Lost faith in the system. You know, I experienced years of depression, and the International Olympic Committee wasn't paying for my therapy. So these are things I don't want to see other athletes experience because the effects can be long-lasting, and not just in that frame of time in which you're a successful athlete, but these athletes that are competing today are dedicating themselves, as I did, with hard work and maximizing their ability, and they should be rewarded. And oftentimes they aren't because the system isn't being policed effectively. So all those sponsorship dollars, all those opportunities that could be won, and just individual human, you know, rights to have a clean sport for clean opportunity for clean sport is not being protected, and that does a lot to people in varying ways.
Yeah, I would just echo. I mean, I think it's, and Allison articulated it extremely well from a personal side. I mean, you know, to us, it is the biggest injustice in sport when, whether it's an individual athlete or a team, loses because someone else who they were competing against, you know, intentionally breaks the rules to gain a competitive advantage. And while it's easy to say, why do we care? All they're harming is themselves, if anyone. No, at the end of the day, there are victims of doping, and those are the athletes who are there agreeing to the rules, playing by the rules, working their tails off, foregoing other opportunities, whether it's education or otherwise, in order to be the best that they can be, whether it's to represent the U.S. Or any other country in the Olympic Games, or as a professional athlete or a college athlete, to essentially be robbed of your opportunity, to me, is the biggest equal opportunity, equal rights, you know, discussion that centers around athletes today, I think.
And something else that, you know, Olympic sport is a little different than some other sports in that if you don't win the gold medal, you oftentimes don't get access to any opportunity. So it's even more important that doping is monitored effectively.
Yeah. You hear that, and you can certainly understand the motivation for your job and the role you have. But when you think about the fact that you're going up against not just individual dopers, but state-sanctioned doping, in the case with Russia, where unless there are whistleblowers who come forward, how would you ever know or begin to tackle that problem? In Russia, from your chair, was that preventable? Is there any way from the outside to sort of affect change there?
Yeah, I think so. There is a global regulator known as WADA, not to get too much in the weeds, but they're the body, the organization at the world level who's responsible for ensuring the rules of sport that we've all agreed to are enforced and are followed by whether it's a state like Russia or individual federations or teams. And unfortunately, they, in our opinion, were conflicted and essentially had handcuffs on and a blindfold and didn't do the job that they should have done early enough. And thank God, a female competitor and her husband from the Russia national team in track and field came forward and exposed this problem. Investigations then ensued and demonstrated that, yeah, this was not just poor anti-doping systems, so poor testing. This was intentional, funding of the drugs, conspiracy to hide positive tests, to knowingly send athletes to the largest stage, the Olympic Games, World Championships in certain sports, swimming and track and field, to essentially rob and defraud from other countries.
Yeah, when I think about that, and knowing some of the proposals that you've been very important to suggesting, that idea of WADA's independence or conflict in testing, what can be done there to sort of separate and remove conflict from the building, especially when you're thinking about the fact that prior to getting to the Olympics, all of the individual countries are sort of running their own testing, but might be a little bit behind the doping. So.
Yeah, our solution is pretty simple. You have to remove the fox from guarding the hen house.
Right.
And you can't have sport, who is wonderful at promoting itself and putting fans in the seats and having an awesome display on NBC or whatever channel you watch the sports on, and then want to take action that might be contrary to that success. And that's the promoting policing aspect that we've been loud and clear has to be separated. That's what's happened in the United States. We think it's been effective because you're not conflicted in making tough decisions, whether it's to bring a case against a Lance Armstrong or any other athlete. You're not weighing in your mind the negative impact financially on your brand as a sports organizer. You're just there following the oath that you've taken to, ensure the rights of clean athletes are ultimately protected. So our solution is pretty simple in just removing that conflict of interest at the world level, and then I think it goes a long way in solving the problem.
Yeah, Allison, you can speak to that a little bit. I know that the USOC and what their testing regulations are seem a little bit onerous to me, but in competition, if you are getting that level of testing from your governing body, but you see that certain teams are not, they don't get the same testing, like, are you up in arms about that? Is that an injustice to you, or are you just proud of the fact that you know that the U.S. is sort of more proactive about this?
Well, you want to be up in arms, but you have no arms. I mean, it's a very frustrating position to be in because as an athlete, as in my experience and in many athletes' experience, you commit to all of these, following all of these rules, and you're reporting where you are every day so that doping agents can find you, so you can produce a urine sample that then can be tested. You're showing up at competition and providing yourself to be available for testing. You're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing, but then you see and hear of instances in which other people aren't. And it's very frustrating, it's unjust, and it's unfair. In my Olympic experience, I've heard and saw many people experiencing different testing protocols than I did, and that shouldn't be happening. Yeah. In one case, somewhere in the world, somebody should be tested in the same way that somebody's tested in another part of the world. It should be across the board. Everybody should be treated in the same way, and I'd really love to see the doping infractions being treated like violations of rules of play. If you in swimming decide that on the day of the Olympics you're going to invent a new way to do a turn, that's great, but if it violates the rules of that turn, you can expect to get disqualified. Unfortunately, if you show up at the Olympics now and you say, well, I've been doping, there's a chance I'm going to get away with it. Yeah. So I'm going to not expect to get disqualified. So I'd like to see those two things treated in the same way, and more importantly, the perspective from athletes and coaches to be the same. Right. You can expect to be disqualified.
Yeah.
Knowing full well that in a perfect society, if you fix everything, it's just human nature that people are going to still try and cheat. They will invent another way to get around testing. People try new types of drugs that trace levels go down. what in your mind can be helped by technology in this space? Like, I know you have to stay one step ahead of what's on the horizon, knowing full well that, you know, people have a lot of motivations to do.
Yeah, listen, I think, and it's why we're here, we think it's the ultimate solution to protecting athletes' rights. And, you know, we give $3+ million a year to research to better develop tests, and we've, you know, partnered with nanotechnology companies, you know, blood spot companies. So we're always, one of our pillars is innovation. And we firmly believe that the innovation on the technological and the scientific side is absolutely critical to us having the best tests, to ensuring they're robust and they, you know, say what they're supposed to say, and provide that sort of playing field where athletes can have confidence, knowing the rules are going to be enforced consistently at a cost basis that makes sense, and that sport will have no other choice but to put in place. I think is critically important, and we would ask everyone here to, you know, look at the Partnership for Clean Competition or other ideas you might have that can transfer into our world. And you know, it's a wonderful opportunity to serve a great mission and help athletes achieve their success doing it the right way.
Yeah, I wish I could spend more time talking to y'all about that, and I know from these people's perspective, they want to talk to you about tech and what can be done in this space, but that's our time. So I want to thank y'all for coming out, and everybody who attended. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, there's going to be a lot more of that, I think, this evening on the streets of New Orleans. I hope you had a great time last night. I hope you're all having a lovely day today. So, fake news, post-truth era, media objectivity, these are all big issues going around right now. We've got some great speakers to talk on this. So we've got Jared Grusd of Huffington Post and John Avlon of the Daily Beast. They're in conversation with Anna Kasparian, the host of the Young Turks. Please welcome them on stage.
All right. Oh.
Hey everyone, how is everyone doing today?
Good.
Lots of excited faces.
Anyone else go to the Maple Leaf last night? See Rebirth? Good to be in New Orleans.
All right, guys. So right now, the question of media credibility is more important than ever. Fake news and the topic of fake news seems to be something that we can't escape, we can't get away from. We hear it quite often from the current administration in the US, specifically Donald Trump. And so we have two media heavy hitters here to kind of discuss the issue and what the potential solutions could be if fake news is a problem. So, John, I'm going to start with you. Give me your opinion on fake news, because there is a little bit of a division among Americans as to whether or not fake news is really a thing. Does it really exist, or is it just an excuse used by politicians to minimize negative news coverage?
Well, first of all, fake news is a real problem, there's no question, but I think we need to define the terms really clearly, because it is not what some folks would like to sell it as. Fake news I define as fundamentally false stories that are written with the intent to deceive. Right? They may have a propagandistic purpose. Sometimes they may be just fueled by profit. But this is something that has become epidemic. It's calculated misinformation. What fake news is not is what President Trump and the White House crew are trying to sell, which is any news that might be critical of them, news that offends you somehow, personally or politically. That's an Orwellian attempt to blur basic distinctions between fact and fiction, between truth and lies. That's incredibly dangerous to start muddying the waters. But that is its explicit intent, and I think that's just a measure of how serious the times we're in right now are, that's something we're debating with pushback an agenda-driven pushback from the White House.
So, Jared, there seems to be a little bit of an issue deciphering the difference between the type of fake news that John just perfectly laid out and, news reports that might be wrong on some of the facts, right? And everyone in the media at some point in their careers makes a mistake, they get a fact wrong, they report it, and the right thing is to retract it, right? And so how do we get the American people to understand the difference between intentional fake news and reporting that has the best intentions but maybe got some of the facts wrong?
I think part of it is actually that word intention, because I think where we have arrived is at a point where there's a line between bias in the media and fake. And I think in a world that's becoming increasingly more polarized politically, this concept of bias is what's polluting the conversation. And if you think about it, how do we as people actually access the news and the information that we consume on a daily basis? And as the world has shifted to digital, and within digital to mobile, the two dominant platforms where people access news is really through search and through social. And when you're in search, you are explicitly seeking something. I have an intention of what I'm looking for, and somebody delivers what I'm looking for. So my own personal biases get reinforced in what I'm looking for. If you think about social, the very concept of social is, what do all the people in my network consume, and is that relevant to me? And that kind of reaffirms biases that I may have. Like maybe I'm friends with people who don't have any common interests or thought process as I do, but most people actually are friends with people who are more similar to them than not. So you have this self-reinforcing issue in terms of how we consume it. And so the platforms who are behind this are working very hard at trying to sort of solve that issue of bias at the platform level. On the same token, as publishers of content, there are either explicit or latent biases in terms of journalistic enterprises. And some media organizations skew more conservative, some skew more liberal, some skew more for millennials, some skew for different demographics. And I think it's okay to have a point of view on the world. And in fact, consumers want to, and people want to know that the people who are delivering the information have a point of view. I think in that regard, it's really, really important for a publication and for the writers to be very transparent about where they're coming from, what their intentions are, and what their backgrounds are. It's why a lot of the best journalistic enterprises make the bios of the authors really front and center, so you can really, as a person, understand where they're coming from. And I think having that knowledge is really, really important. Of course, people get stuff wrong, and whether you're an athlete, which we just heard about, or whether you're a journalist, you may not get the facts right all the time, but then it's up to the writer and the news organization to correct that. So I think when you put those two things together, it's why people are not so much because of fake news, although that doesn't help, but also this concept of bias on both the platform layer and the publication layer.
So I love that you brought that up, because when I was in journalism school, the biggest no-no once you're out there on the field is sharing your opinion. And I remember one of my favorite journalism professors telling me, do not ever share your opinion until you pay your dues and you are credible enough to be an op-ed writer or something like that. But the media landscape is changing, and it's changing rapidly. People do want a point of view. And John, you published a book about wingnuts, and
Yes,
I found it fascinating because we do have a very polarized political system right now. And at first, I was under the assumption that, hey, maybe it's because of some of the media players and the shock jocks like Rush Limbaugh that are playing a role in polarizing people. But it seems like there is a hunger for biased media. People, as you just mentioned, Jared, are looking for information that reinforces their preconceived notions, right? And I think that has kind of created a system that allows something like fake news to thrive. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there are a lot of sort of macro dynamics that have gotten us to this point. Partisan news and polarization of society and hyper-partisan politics all are self-reinforcing, right? And in the macro sense, you get the fragmentation of the media environment that has unfortunately, instead of allowing everyone to sort of take advantage of the democratization of media to access a wider array of opinions than ever before, too often we self-segregate into separate political realities. And this all of a sudden can start reinforcing hyperpartisanship and polarization in Congress, this idea of us against them. It undercuts sort of the essential idea behind democracy, which is an assumption of goodwill among fellow citizens. And I think a lot of the technological trends that Jared described, I think are driving it too, because part of what fake news is, it's sort of confirmation bias meets clickbait. And it sort of takes that DNA of partisan news and it sends it into the absurd, but it becomes incredibly toxic, incredibly radioactive. So I think the larger lack of trust in news media has been increasing for, unfortunately, decades. It predates social media, it predates fake news, but that's the foundation of it. And so at the Daily Beast, for example, we try very hard to be nonpartisan but not neutral. What does that mean? It means we will hit both sides as appropriate, that we have columnists who range liberal to libertarian, that we try to be transparent, we try to be edgy, but you know, you always balance the attitude with accuracy. What we don't do, and what I think is incredibly dangerous, is this sort of, on the one hand, on the other, myth of moral equivalence on every issue. Because once you start buying into that, then that itself becomes muddying about the line between truth and lies, fact and fiction. And that's something we as journalists need to be pushing back on. We need to be unapologetic about pushing a fact-based debate and be transparent about opinions and perspectives when they exist.
Right, and I think that's a really important point, because one of the biggest issues in the media was that journalists were confusing the importance of objectivity with neutrality.
Right.
And so they treated both sides as if they're completely equal, they're both saying one thing or the other, and then it's up to you to decide who's telling the truth. And again, I think that played a role in people getting really frustrated with establishment media or traditional media, and then they turned to some more obscure independent sources. So all these little things did play a role, in my opinion, as to how fake news emerged and how it became so influential.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about how influential it really is, because I think there are some disagreements as to how much of an impact, how many ramifications we've experienced as a result of misleading or fake news. So do you want to jump in?
Sure. I mean, you know, look, this became epidemic in a relatively short period of time, which is one of the reasons why I think we were ill-equipped to deal with it. I mean, misinformation campaigns, the purchasing of bots to try to depress turnout or confuse people as to facts. That's something that we have seen, you know, unfortunately, primarily in other democracies more so than our own. And I think, you know, one of the many factors that led to this perfect storm that had an impact on the election was sort of, you know, Facebook kind of pulling the goalie when it came to some of the people who were individually curating articles out of concern that there was individual bias. And all of a sudden, what flowed in was a massive amount of fake news that people weren't prepared on the platforms to try to adjudicate. So we know fake news was getting shared more often than real news in those closing, critical closing months and weeks of the election. And I'll say that, you know, there's a brand new Kennedy School of Government report about the rise of fake news that I recommend. People are trying to fix this on different fronts. Jimmy Wales of Wikipedia is trying to launch an initiative. And I think we all need to take it seriously, but it really, it happens so quickly that it overwhelmed a lot of the people who'd normally be there to adjudicate it. And that's one of the reasons, given the election results were so tight, you can't pinpoint one thing. But it can have a demonstrable effect on our democracy, and it's happening in the French election right now. So yes, it's real. The dynamics we need to understand, and then we need to aggressively confront them. As journalists, as businesses, as advertisers, as academics, like we all need to have a multi-front push on this right now because it's impacting our democracy in real time.
Jared, what stood out to you the most in regard to fake news during this past election? Was there something that spread that had like a serious impact that you were concerned about?
Well, one thing to consider is whether it's this election or other elections, and even in this conversation of fake news and legitimate news, is the number of people in this country and around the world who we like to refer to as unnewsed or undernewsed, which is people who are actually who don't feel part of the system at all. They're like both disenfranchised from a voting perspective, but also disenfranchised from like the powers and structures of like the society around them. That's a really big population. And I think one of the opportunities in front of all of us is to figure out a way in which we can actually help like a broader group of society gain access to like the power structures of society. And I think if we can really like tackle that as a problem collectively as journalism and as citizens, that can go a long way towards democracy. I will say also, on this topic of fake news, I get uncomfortable when we talk about fake news almost as its own construct, because I find it dangerous. And it's dangerous not sort of within the construct of what fake news is. It's the effect of what fake news could be on the role of media and free discourse in society. If you think about this not from a journalism point of view or from a content point of view, but in every democracy around the world, like legislatures have gotten together to say there's got to be rules and restrictions on who actually controls and owns the media. Like, there's always been restrictions. Like, if the government controls the media, then you know what the outcome of the media is going to be. If only large corporations control it and consolidate power, you may be locking in the control of discourse in a very, very consolidated point of view.
Wouldn't you argue that that's been an ongoing problem with media in the US?
Yeah, it's been a problem, but here's the opportunity. Like, one of the great things about Twitter, one of the great things about social media, it's now so easy to publish content. It's now never been like more accessible to consume content, and it's amidst the fact that we have these extraordinary platforms where conversations can take place, that the lines between sort of like serious, well-reported journalism and just like opinion can get blurred. Mm-hmm. And I think it's for that reason that publications like what we're doing at HuffPost, what John is doing in his organization, all of us are spending a lot of time making very deep investments in our core identity as a brand. It's like, it has to matter. Like, it's no coincidence that the New York Times is taking commercials out for the first time ever. It's no coincidence that all of us are saying, like, who are we? Why are we relevant? Why do we matter? Because when you get to know who we are and what role we want to play in society, then you can make a decision whether this is an entity you want to get behind or this is an entity you don't want to get behind.
So, and this is really important because remember, conventional wisdom 3-4 years ago at the dawn of sort of the rise of social media was the brands don't matter anymore. News brands don't matter. People don't care what they click on. They're clicking on individual stories. We know now that actually people do pay attention who's disseminating the information. And guess what? They should. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing sort of a Trump bump in subscriptions. People are also getting hip to the fact that, guess what? Quality journalism isn't free. And we're going to need to have a diversified revenue strategy to actually just make sure the business model of journalism gets fixed, because that's actually really important to the maintenance of democracy as well. And in a macro sense, I always believe that, American people are smart but not necessarily informed. And one of the things that has driven, I think, the divisions in our country is the death of local media. We have watched local paper after local paper get killed. Pretty soon we'll have a first state that doesn't have a local paper. And yes, citizen journalists can supplement that a little bit, but it's really hard to hold state legislators accountable. And guess what? Those are usually hotbeds of corruption, spoiler alert. And so the more all of a sudden that folks don't have local media looking out for them, the more they're likely to feel a sense of, you're parachuting in and doing anthropological studies of my town, Washington Post or New York Times or whatever, and that builds a sense of distrust, even where there maybe should not be distrust. So that's why it's got to be a multifaceted pushback. And this is all happening at a time, not just accusations of fake news from the federal government, but Reince Priebus, the chief of staff, saying this past weekend that the White House has looked at cracking down on libel laws. There are constitutional structures that protect us. The Constitution doesn't mention political parties; it does mention the press. But this is really urgent on every front, and we've got to analyze how we got here and start pushing back across the board. People supporting quality journalism, locally or nationally, advertisers and corporate citizens, consciously whitelisting quality journalism, those are all going to be pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, in that regard, actually, there's further challenges because, as John alluded to, but just to be explicit about it, when you factor in the business models that are driving journalism, that adds an extra level of pressure in terms of how do journalistic enterprise deliver their best quality work. And specifically, if you're ad-supported as a business model, we're also living in a day and age where brands really care a lot about where they're associated, what content they're being placed against. And so, maintaining the integrity of the journalism, but also sort of getting brands to feel comfortable of getting behind the actual business model, we're seeing some pressure there across the industry.
And there's a catch-22 there that's really important for folks to understand. On the one hand, people are reading news more often than ever before, right? And if you're an advertiser, you want to reach, educated, influential readers. Quality news creates a quality readership. That should be a good transaction of value, right? But what's very tempting for brands to say that hard news is unsafe because the environment is so polarized, that if it's politics or if it's dealing with real world threats like terrorism or anything else, that negativity could be brand unsafe. And if folks start taking that decision, guess what? We will start getting more focus on entertainment news and sports news and less hard news. That itself is also dangerous for democracy because at some point it becomes bread and circuses like the Romans had to deal with. It's something to distract people, to give the illusion of news without the reality of news. So that's a real danger we need to deal with as well.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. And I mean, we can honestly host an hour-long panel on that and that alone. And it's not just something that you're seeing in, traditional media or print media, cable news. It's something that we're experiencing in digital news as well. I host the Young Turks, independent news source, and now all of a sudden advertisers are pulling out of YouTube because of the previous model that allowed their ads to do either pre-roll or post-roll on hate speech. And so now they've gone in a completely different direction where they're like, we don't want to be on any political content, we don't want to be on any type of sexual content, even if it's just sex education. And so there are legitimate sources out there that are trying to make a living independently, I should say, that are getting hit by the emergence of fake news, the emergence of hate speech, the polarization that we're experiencing in politics right now. It's honestly a nightmare, and it's really difficult to adapt to that. But what are the answers? Because you mentioned whitelisting.
Sure.
And so right now there's, this pressure on Silicon Valley CEOs. Mark Zuckerberg, he has a moral obligation to do something about fake news. And the question is, what does he do? How do you mitigate this issue or solve this issue without, creeping into First Amendment, violation territory, right? That's what I'm most concerned about. So Jared, I'm going to let you take this one.
Sure. So I think one thing to point out, and I do think there's an obligation of all the stakeholders in the industry to actually solve this problem, because I think underlying it is what John has eloquently articulated, is we believe in a world where there should be free speech and there should be an outlet for discourse. So if that's the table stakes assumption, we all need to get together, whether you're Facebook, Google, or us at HuffPost. But one thing to note is that as a distributor, distributors who've got power always play this role in terms of what is being shown and what is not being shown. That's no different than at any point in the history of media where there's been a few outlets that have the vast majority of people on those outlets, and they determine what gets shown. And so there is always this level of editing, and that's taking place because there's only so much time and so much outlet, and they're making decisions. One could make a decision, don't put news content and put some other content like games, which is what Facebook used to do. So I think there is this obligation, but I think we shouldn't kid ourselves in the sense that this kind of editorial thing has not been part of the equation. It's always been part of the equation, as far as I can tell.
It's scary to, name someone as the arbiter of who decides. which news source is credible, which is fake, which has bad intentions. You never want to put that much power in the hands of one person, especially when it comes to an outlet like Facebook. And look, Facebook is exploring lots of different options. It's not like they're going to have Mark Zuckerberg look at all these sources and make the decision. But I do worry a little bit about whitelisting as well, because whitelisting certainly does benefit media outlets that have been around for a while, that have been established. But what about up-and-coming news outlets that have the best intentions? How do we answer that question?
Look, I think it requires a degree of flexibility and transparency. And that, we're always going to have a who will watch the Watchmen kind of problem. But one of the ways to address that is to really take advantage of the democratization of information and make sure that people can petition to get in, that what the parameters are is clearly constructed, and it's not simply a black box that doesn't allow anybody entry, no ability to petition. That's a dangerous scenario. But I think also the little d democratization of media is something we need to take advantage of. We can't wait for one person to come save us, whether it's the President of the United States or Mark Zuckerberg. The thing about being a democracy is ultimately we the people are the backstop. It requires vigorous citizenship, and you vote with your eyeballs and your wallet every day. And to actually take some of the action like Sleeping Giants did with Breitbart, which was enormously effective. And again, it's not about politics per se, right? It's simply that if advertisers want to support a conservative outlet, maybe they should support, advertise it with, say, National Review or the Weekly Standard, and not people, who are intentionally trying to inflame divisions. And have black crime tags on their stories, as one example with Breitbart, or MASH notes of the Confederate flag, or any example you want to take. At least then it's an exercise of the democratic impulse. What I think the larger point is that corporate citizens, consumers, businesses, we all need to recognize that we have an obligation to be part of the solution here, and it's not going to be pure and it's not going to be simple. But I just wrote a book about George Washington's farewell address, and one of the points he was making is that enlightened opinion is necessary to a self-governing society. Enlightened opinion. I mean, this is basic to democracy. And if you want to pull all the way out, one of the challenges we're seeing to liberal democracy as a concept is countries who are trying to weaken faith in liberal institutions, like the press, like the integrity of democracy, and that's a strategy on their part. So we really have to, have a rally around the flag pushback on that, as citizens, as businesses.
Here's something cool and related to your enlightenment concept. One of the products that we're working on at HuffPost, to get at your question, is really cool. It's in a beta phase. We call it Flipside. And essentially what we do is for articles that we publish and that are published in the world, what we try and do is contextualize it within the broader ecosystem of the issue. And what we've done is we've tried to look at like Twitter's API and other social APIs and say, for this topic, where this article is on the spectrum relative to where the world population on the social medias are, it like skews kind of left, it skews right, it skews left of center. The majority of activity taking place in social media as it relates to this specific topic is over here, and this article is here. So people can actually sort of have a mind map and conceptualize like, hey, this article is here, the world seems to be over here, and I can at least start having a perspective on where my thought process is in relation to where all the pockets of conversation around the issue is.
Right.
So it essentially maps the ideological component of the article written.
Now,
so,
and it's not pure science. Like we do take a lot of data from social feeds, but it requires some editorial curation of like how you actually get the map. But it's like a step in the direction of trying to give people context for where issues are and where your thoughts are in relationship to those issues.
Yeah, and look, but there too, getting the inputs right are going to be important because conservatives are always going to say the Daily Beast is liberal, no matter how many conservative columnists we have, and we consciously try to balance.
Yeah.
And some
and
folks,
liberals are going to say that it's pretty conservative.
Right. And that's that, in my view, that probably means we're doing it about right, But it's really important to start getting a sense of, are you getting a balanced news diet? How can we communicate to people so that they have a sense of, am I just getting self-reinforcing messages that may have less and less to do with reality, and not over-index, just because someone's drinking the Kool-Aid doesn't mean we need to address the definition of reality to meet halfway to their worldview. I mean, there is such a thing as facts, and we need to assert that. My favorite quote that I cannot quote enough is Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, not their own facts. And that's an important part of what we have to do as journalists right now, is really aggressively embrace that ideal without apology. And to make sure that we're being fair and to understand that our credibility comes from our ability to criticize from a position of independence, but that we can't let the tail wag the dog in these important civic debates. We've got to play our game.
Well, we're out of time, unfortunately, and I don't want to get beaten off the stage. We got threatened back there.
They threatened us earlier.
They did. But, you know, I just want to leave you all with this. I know that this is an incredibly smart audience, and, you know, you're savvy. You know how to tell the difference between fake news and real news. But, you know, do your part. You know, if you notice anyone in your personal life that's sharing content that's intentionally misleading and it's propaganda, you know, talk to them in the nicest way possible. Don't confront them, because that doesn't work. And let them know, hey, you know, this doesn't seem right. Here's another source that's a little more credible. Here's what the reality is of the story. We're all responsible for fighting back and pushing back against what happened during this past election and what surely will continue to happen unless we find ways to solve it.
That's right.
Thank you, everyone.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for reading the beats, too.
Thanks so much, guys. So you heard it. That's everyone's responsibility on fake news. So we're moving on. Everybody's relationship with their bank is traditionally one of the most important customer relationships we have. Things are really changing fast in the industry. Today, we've got the CMO of Wells Fargo, Jamie Moldavsky, who's going to be in conversation with Peter Smith, the CEO and founder of blockchain, talking about trust, customer loyalty, and they're going to be in conversation with Rob Cox of Reuters News. Please welcome them on stage.
Thanks.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Hope everyone's had a fine New Orleans morning. It's 11 o'clock. Time to be talking about stuff like the future of money. No simple topic, but I have two great people here to talk about it with. What's great about the two of you is that you both have different visions about the future of money, and they don't necessarily, one of you's right, and one of you may be wrong. Who is it going to be? So I'm going to start with you, Peter, because I know you have a view that banks are going to be a relic of this era.
I think the view is a little more nuanced than that. So, first of all, the woman is always right. My grandmother taught me this, so I'm probably wrong. But past that, you know, I think that it is true that banks won't be a big part of the future. The nuance to that is that banks are currently in the midst of transitioning from process organizations, really banks, to being technology companies. And so the question that's interesting to think about over the next 10-year curve is how many of the existing banks like Wells or Goldman or JPM make the conversion into being technology companies. So I very much do agree with the first part of your statement that I don't think banks will be a big part of financial services provision 15 years from now. But I think that a lot of the companies providing those services, a lot of the companies, like technology companies providing those services, will have been banks in their past.
Oh, so banks transform themselves into technology companies. Some of them do call themselves technology companies. You go to a place like Goldman Sachs, they'll say, well, we have 10,000 engineers and 2,000 traders. How does Wells Fargo view this future?
Yeah, I mean, I think we completely agree that it's becoming a technology and data-driven business, and so I think to the point that being at the forefront of that, investing in the ways that we make banking faster, easier, safer for our customers, I think we would probably share that priority. I do think because of both the regulatory structure as well as the notion of trust and where people want to trust to put their money, I think we know that that's evolving, and mobile first and technology is enhancing the ability to do that differently. in this environment, we still know there's a role for physical and person-to-person banking. And so I think that we do see an important role, and at least for the foreseeable future, we do believe that technology will continue to transform the banking industry, but it will not eradicate banks, that they perform an incredibly critical function in commercial and consumer worlds. And it's a lot bigger than kind of the movement of money. It's also the management of money and the achievement of financial goals over time.
I mean, yeah, and the market certainly believes that. So,
Yeah.
so when we look at the market capitalization of Wells Fargo, it must be up there with JP Morgan's largest bank in the country. You're a small company. So the market seems to think that there's still a lot of promise in the big banks. They're not yet sure about you. Or you're going public, though, at some point.
At some point. I think that there's two things there. The first is that, you know, the market is usually right in the short term, but rarely right in the long term. And so if we're talking about a 10 to 15-year horizon, a lot of that capital isn't pricing that in. The second thing is that most of the capital in Wells Fargo or any other bank is in some kind of mutual fund or tracker that's not making an active decision to hold that capital. But stepping back from that sort of like pedantic economist argument, I think that, you know, when you look at where the banks are today, they have, as an industry, some of the most horrific NPS scores outside of the airline industry. They're struggling under really terrible cost. Net Promoter Score. There's few entities on earth that have a lower rating in terms of consumer trust and love than banks and the banking industry in general. They're incredibly inefficient on capital right now, and so they're being squeezed on both ends on that front. And then when you think about the market, you know, one of the most valuable companies in the world today is Amazon. Amazon probably has more consumer payment details on file than any bank or combination of the next three big banks combined. And so it's really pretty nuanced across the field.
I have to respond.
Sure.
Yeah, no, only because I think that, you know, and look, I would argue first and foremost, it's up to the banks to transform ourselves, right, to make sure that we're at the forefront of meeting people's needs. And look, we started 165 years ago when there was the stagecoach. So I think banks have proven that they can adapt and reinvent themselves, but it's the most important piece of that is putting the consumer at the beginning and middle and end of everything that we do and thinking holistically about that experience. And as long as we continue to innovate for that ultimate customer and experience, I think we'll be fine, because that's ultimately why we're in business. We have 70 million customers. Despite what is a challenging industry and headwinds, we deliver very valuable service to them. And Net Promoter Scores aside, I think we feel like we have pretty deep loyalty, but we have to earn it every day. We earn it through our people, we earn it through technology, we earn it through trust. And all of those are things that we double down on, but we have a heritage of demonstrating that over time, we continue to earn that trust, and we continue to deliver not only for our customers, but for shareholders.
Well, let me ask you, obviously, Wells Fargo had this fake customer account issue. Not a huge financial blow, but definitely reputationally. And you, as the chief marketing officer, are in charge of going out there and rebuilding any lost trust and explaining to people what happened. Trust is, I think you both have mentioned it, is at the heart of financial services. What are you doing to sort of win back your customers?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing is actions, right? And I'd say they fall on two lines. The first is we have to fix and make right what went wrong, and that's what we're doing. So first and foremost is we will be a better bank out of this. There are things that happened, there are things we did that were not in the customer's interest. So that's changed. We've changed incentives, we've done things for our team members. So those are all changing who we are as a bank to be a better bank than our competitors or than we were. And then the other side is we continue to deliver innovations every day that make our customers' lives better and easier. So we've talked about, you know, the cardless ATM, the first bank to do that. People walk out of their house with their phone. They don't want to necessarily carry a card. They can get cash if they need it. Those are the kinds of innovations that we know are important to our customers and that keep us relevant. So I think that it's both earning trust back in terms of fixing the things that are wrong, but as importantly, innovating to make life easier and better for our customers. And we have the resources to do that.
Now, I mean, how does your business, I mean, let's be honest, how do you capitalize on some of the NPS numbers, these kinds of issues, which Wells Fargo is not the only one that's come across these issues. I mean, is there a way to capitalize it? And what do you say? Because this other idea of Bitcoin being a sort of, you know, it's part of the shadowy world, or blockchain being a sort of derivative of the shadowy world that people aren't 100% sure they trust either. How do you kind of explain that to your future customers?
So there's only like one small question within that paragraph. So I think that the first thing is talk about sort of opportunities. And there is a big opportunity that's been created by a lot of the missteps in the banking system. But a lot of our conversation so far today has been really focused on what's happening in the US. And much of the opportunity for technology companies, as well for us, is actually overseas. And so the vast majority of our business is not in the United States. It's in G7 countries, so it's in Latin America, India, a couple of the fast-growing economies in Southeast Asia, China, and then increasingly Europe. There's not, it's a very different market from what's going on here. And payments and payment technology and financial services are evolving much, much faster outside of the US than they are in the US. And so, you know, when you look at customers in China or Southeast Asia, they're very, very different from what they want, what they expect, and quite frankly, what they're open to than consumers here in the US. And so most of the really cool stuff is actually happening overseas.
Why is that?
And that's where most of it is. Well, I think there's two things. First of all is that Americans still live a very America-centric life. There's not a lot of...
You might say America first.
America first. I instantly regret that statement. So that's part of it. You know, we have a huge economy. You know, so this is one of the reasons that WhatsApp took off in Europe before here, is that in Europe you had all this long-distance texting problem, right? Whereas in the States, we didn't have long-distance texting, even though texting from California to New York is the equivalent of texting from London to, you know, Greece, right? And so because we have such a big economy here, we have a lot fewer considerations across that spectrum. The other thing is that regulation is a lot lighter overseas. And so the US has an incredibly highly regulated financial services market, which frankly keeps not just fintechs, but also banks from delivering a lot of the more innovative products that customers overseas are enjoying. And so I do view most of the opportunity in the financial services space as outside of the US. Now that said, all the missteps in the global banking system, the great financial crisis that we saw a few years ago, the increased volatility in the world today, all makes people wake up in the morning and question, how is my money being managed? How does my financial services work? How is these services being provided to me? And that creates a huge opportunity for new companies, because anytime people start to question what they have today, you have an opening that you can capitalize on.
But you know, regulation is an interesting point. So, I mean, there is no Airbnb, there is no Uber of fintech. There's lots of fintech, but it's hard to see anyone out there at the moment, maybe apart from your company, Peter, but that is in a position to disrupt on quite the level and the scale that we've seen in so many other industries. Is that, Jamie, is that basically a regulation is your friend if you're a big bank?
Yeah, well, I think regulation as your friend is an interesting concept. But I think, as you said, I think there's always risk in regulation starting to, restrict or constrict innovation, and that's not a good thing. And I do think we do believe that, some areas of lesser regulation would benefit everybody. But that said, I do think in some ways it is to our advantage. I think the other thing, though, I would say to what you were just talking about is, we do believe that there's room for everybody and that we learn a lot from fintechs. We actually partner. We sit in very close to Silicon Valley. We partner with a lot of them. And to your point, we learn a lot from what's happening in Europe and around the world. I think that the benefit in some ways of what you just talked about is this expansion that's happening in Europe and this advancement. We get the benefit of learning from and trying to figure out how do we bring that to the United States and to these markets through the traditional banking system.
Right.
I would say that, to come back to your point, this stuff is happening pretty quickly. So we'll do about 30 billion in transactions this year. On a monthly basis, we'll do 2.5 billion. 3 years ago, that number was in the tens of millions. And so it's growing.
But for a big bank like a...
But for a big bank, it's relatively trivial. At the same time, one of the most valuable private technology companies in the world today is a fintech. It's called Alipay. They are enormous.
That's true.
We don't talk about them in the West because we don't use Alipay here in the US. Right now they're acquiring MoneyGram, and so we might start talking about them in the US. But they are one of the 5 or 6 most valuable private technology companies in the world.
Right, and Alipay, which is sort of controlled by Jack Ma and Alibaba, of course benefits from a less regulated structure in China than you guys are have to deal with. I mean, I think that's right. That there'll be a question of a regulatory arbitrage.
Right.
I think so, but I think also the sort of other reality there is that you didn't have a tradition of consumer financial services in China that exists here.
Right.
And so anytime you're in a market, and we see this every day when we're trying to grow our business, anytime you go into a market and you're extending a service for the very first time, which is often what we're doing, it's very easy to convert people into it. Whereas in the States, you're asking people to switch. And it's actually hard to get people to switch. So new markets are always much more exciting. So China is actually pretty regulated. The PBOC is quite stringent, particularly over the last 2 years. But what's really helped Alipay grow is the fact that they were coming in and saying, hey, for the first time ever, here's a credit product. For the first time ever, here's some insurance, right? So they weren't competing against incumbents. They were coming into entirely new markets. And I think when you are a technology fintech startup or you're thinking about starting a fintech company, the key thing you have to think about is what are the new markets I'm going to go after? Because it's much, much easier than me going out and competing with Wells.
Right. Well, and part of that, I mean, I just said what I would add is I think part of that is because there is an ecosystem, even for a consumer, around their financial affairs. And so it's one thing to have a P2P kind of capability, which we now have with Zelle, which is a cross-industry, 85 million customers around the banks for a person-to-person payment. So that's one solution that works. But on the other hand, you have mortgages and you have investing and you have other financial needs. And the P2P, the payment piece of that is a really critical piece. But as people mature, age, develop broader financial needs, there is this ecosystem of how do I manage all my money over time and how do I manage those needs? And I do think that's where quote-unquote traditional banks and or combinations of traditional banks and other capabilities come into play, which is how do these pieces of your puzzle fit together in a way that's easy, convenient, and by the way that you trust, because as your odds and your stakes increase, right, over time, you really want to bet with somebody who's going to be there.
And what's tricky about that is that, you know, right now, you've had basically two things happen in the fintech space. One was people building slightly better consumer experiences on the top of the same rails, and that's obviously range bound. There's only so far you can take that. TransferWise is a good example of that. And then you have people that are reinventing sort of the fundamental infrastructure level, which is what we do.
Right.
The problem is you have to build a whole new fundamental infrastructure level. Then you have to attract enough volume that you have a real business. And then you need to build the ecosystem of financial services and products that you're talking about. This is a long process.
Right. Right. I mean, it's interesting what you say, this ability to leapfrog existing legacy products or infrastructure. That, of course, raises the question about if you have a lot of it. So, I mean, branches, you know, I'm not, show of hands, who's been at a branch in a bank in the last 2 weeks?
Oh.
Right. Actually, quite a few.
More than right? Surprising.
About 10 people.
Yeah, 10. That's more than I thought. But no, but you have got you have this difficulty of trying to leapfrog into that next generation and of services and interfaces at the same time as you've got bricks and mortar and branches and people. And how does that all play out?
I mean, I don't think we look at it as being burdened as much as being as a value add as long as we can evolve the right way. So I think we look at it as we've announced that we will be closing branches. However, we also know that we monitor and track daily, weekly, monthly usage, and there's no question that people come to the branch for less and different things. On the other hand, when you ask people why they choose to open up, today at least, their primary debit payment account, it's oftentimes because it's the bank that's near me. And part of that is just, you know, legacy, and people want to feel safe. They want to know their money actually physically sits and exists somewhere, and that sign is actually a sign of that. But that's evolving, and so there's no question that we will continue to evolve. We continue to innovate on mobile and digital first, and yet we know that there's an important role that people play, and we'll just continue to make those right shifts. But I think we feel very confident that as we make those shifts, we have significant capacity to invest in the mobile and digital first.
Okay, quick question. How does this whole new idea of deregulation, or, well, today or yesterday, depends every day, depending on the tweet of the day, but there seems to be certainly a sense that we are going to have a slightly deregulated financial services industry relative to the last 8 years. Quickly, where's that? How's that work out for you?
We will see what happens, but I think it's too early to see what the practical impact of any of that will be. You know, the biggest changes that could come down are anything on the consumer protection front, which is a fine line between protecting consumers and keeping the market stable and preventing any new innovative products from coming to the market. We've probably been a little on one side of that for a while. Right. This would be interesting to see it shift back, but it's way too early to tell.
Jamie?
Yeah, and I would just say I think we're built to to excel in a regulated environment as much as one can. And yet I also think we are going to continue to be a customer champion and advocate for any environment that creates more choice and more success for the customer.
Thank you. That's all we have time for today. Enjoy the rest of Collision. Not too much. Still a bit of work to do still.
Thank you.
Give our panelists a hand.
Thanks so much, guys. Thanks very much indeed. So, next up, Silicon Valley. Its impact, its culture. Obviously, in the tech world, its impact is massive. But has the culture gone wrong? Does it have a superhero complex? To debate this issue, is it okay to have a superhero complex? To debate this issue, two of the biggest names in tech, Robert Scoble of Transformation Group and Silicon Valley legend, Naveen Jain, the CEO and founder of Moon Express. Together, they're in conversation with Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks. Please welcome them on stage.
Yeah. Sitting over here. All right.
Hello, everyone. All right. So we're here to have a discussion about Silicon Valley and how it seems to have a little bit of a superhero complex. And that's a little understandable, especially considering the times we live in and all the unique obstacles to life, whether it be how we get around, how we fix a broken healthcare system or education system, how we mitigate the negative impact of climate change. These are all issues that, thinkers, some of the biggest thinkers in Silicon Valley are thinking about tackling. And so I want to talk to you guys about, some of your ideas, if you think that Silicon Valley has an obligation or should have an obligation to tackle some of these issues. Robert, let me start with you. So you are very much into the VR world, but I'm sure you are into technology in general and how it could benefit society. How do you see technology benefiting society as we move forward? What's one big thing that's really on your radar right now?
Mixed reality. This is a Microsoft HoloLens, and it lets me see things on top of the real world. Just the other night, I was playing with my kids, walking through Rome in my living room. Mm-hmm. And that starts building empathy for the rest of the world, because now we can take people who can't afford to travel, can't afford to have experiences like the ones I've had all over the world, and show them different people's lives and show them how they can work with those people even. This is the best education technology humans have ever created. We are teaching people at Caterpillar how to fix $1 million tractor in real time on top of the tractor. You're not going into a classroom and reading a boring book anymore. You're just wearing a pair of glasses like this, and it's putting stuff on top of the tractor and teaching you, unscrew those 4 screws, look for a red wire, find the red wire, unclip that, right? And it teaches you how to do something. In 10 years, these glasses are going to teach you all sorts of stuff, how to cook meal in your kitchen, how to do welding in your shop if you have a shop. Whatever you want to learn, you're going to learn here. And we're getting tastes of this already. My kids are learning everything on YouTube, right?
Right. I mean, I certainly learned quite a bit on YouTube, whether it's how to, edit videos or, use up-and-coming technology for news content. So you're primarily focused in education, and,
No, I'm a technologist. I had the first ride in the first Tesla. Siri was launched in my son's bedroom. And I'm one of the first ones to have an augmented reality idea. I wrote a book on augmented reality. I want to watch how people like Naveen are pushing the boundaries of humanity and changing our lives, right?
Right.
And this is how the world is going to change deeper than anything I see on the future, except for maybe some of the genetics research that's going on that Naveen will tell you
right.
about.
So I have no doubt that you're interested in technology in general, but for the purposes of, the technology that you first started talking about, it could benefit those
Absolutely.
in education, which I think is important. The education system, especially in the United States, needs a little work.
This is going to affect everything. Sephora is already building augmented reality makeup so I can try on pink lipstick and see if it looks as good on me as it does on you. It
I'm
doesn't.
sure it'll look fabulous.
It doesn't. But they color match the augmented makeup to the physical product, right? And soon we're going to be walking around with glasses, and we're going to be playing with each other with filters or augmentation on everything. So start thinking about education. Journalism is about to change. I mean, I have a 360 camera in my pocket, right? From Insta360. So let me find it in my pocket. You know, I shot the first video at Coachella, 360 video, and 3 years ago that camera was $6,000. Today this is $200, and it live streams to Facebook. That's a huge change in my life. Now I can take people into a situation like we broadcast from Preservation Hall last night, and now all of a sudden you can get the context of what Preservation Hall feels like, even if you've never been here before. And this is the first year I've been able to do that. And in another year, we're going to have volumetric cameras, maybe even built into the phone. So I just hold my phone like this, and I'm capturing this whole space in 3D. And I'm capturing you, and now I can bring you into Unity and do stuff with you and make you a virtual actor. I watched Buzz Aldrin on the surface of the moon with VR, teaching me how we're going to get to Mars.
That's really interesting. So I'm curious, Naveen, how you see yourself, you know, changing the future of certain broken systems in society. And backstage, you and I had a pretty interesting conversation about our healthcare system. It's a big debate happening at this very moment in the United States. You agree that it's a broken system, and you want to find solutions. What is your solution?
So first of all, I wouldn't say it's a broken system. So before I start, good morning, guys.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning. So it is not a broken system, and the reason it never gets fixed is because people believe it is broken. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's our needs have changed. So our healthcare system was designed for the 20th century, where people were dying from the infectious diseases. And so you could go to the hospital, you get the medicine, you were fine. Today in the 21st century, we all are suffering from chronic diseases. And the chronic diseases means you're always sick. That means our needs are now very, very different than they were in 20th century. Irony of the situation is the cure for the infectious diseases is largely responsible for the development of all the chronic diseases, because we believed that we as humans, the best human being is the one that has no bacteria or virus inside us. Little that we know that we as humans are really an ecosystem. And here is what is surprising. Less than 1% of the genes that are expressed in our body actually come from our DNA. 99% of the genes that are expressed in our body are the microbial genes. So as proud as we are of who we are fundamentally a great host or a container for these microorganisms. So yes, you are proud, but think of themselves, you as a portable container, and that's who we are. Right? And when we don't take care of our ecosystem, then the organism suffers, and that is really what's happening. And now it is proven from the Parkinson's disease to cancer, to heart disease, to allergies, to eczema, to autoimmune diseases, they all caused by the imbalance of the microorganism. So when your mother says, listen to your gut, she was the scientist. Your gut holds the key to your health. Now coming back to it, Robert, just to go on, what Robert is talking about are the technologies that exist today that can be taken advantage of. But to me, this is just a means to an end. We as an entrepreneur have to start thinking about what do we want to do? What problem would we solve? Is the healthcare problem, whether it's in education, and these technologies are on exponential curve. So today the Robert is so excited about having this big bulking thing on his head, and he says someday they might be in the glasses. But imagine what is going to happen. We as humans are hardly a human because we have such limited senses. Imagine what if you could see in the infrared? What if you could see the ultraviolet light? What if you could hear all the sounds that are around you? Even though you are hearing me right now, there is somewhere here that Britney Spears is playing the song that you and I can't hear. It's some shortwave radio. What if you could hear that? And you think this is too far out? It is not. Because all the things, your brain is going to be augmented just like it is being augmented incrementally today. I remember when I was growing up, I could remember all the phone numbers. I knew every president when they were born, what they did, everything. Today I don't, because you know why? My phone is augmenting my memory. All I have to know is what to search for on Google, what to do. That means my augmentation, my hippocampus in my brain is now being augmented through my phone to the cloud. That means my brain is already connected to the cloud, but I need this physical device.
So Naveen, I want to touch on that a little bit, because I think that, you know, there are some members of Silicon Valley that want to solve these issues, and they have the best intentions, right? You want to make education more accessible. You want to help fix a broken or maybe intentionally flawed healthcare system.
Obsolete healthcare system.
And with all of these technologies, all of these advances, there are upsides and then there are considerable downsides. And we've seen it with social media. We've seen it with what you just mentioned with our smartphones. We're very reliant on search engines. We're no longer remembering things. You know, the issue of lacking social, in-person communication with one another and relying solely on staying home and communicating digitally. I think those are all downsides that maybe Silicon Valley didn't think of ahead of time.
No, Anna, that is a very short-term view of the world, because ultimately these things are fundamentally the perception. So think about when you are in this virtual world that you talk about not meeting physically, can be as much of an experience when your brain is concerned as if you were physically there. And you start to look at some of the new technology, you will not know the difference what is a reality and what's not a reality.
Is that a good thing, though?
So let me tell you for 1 second here. So let's start for a simple conversation. Let's assume
you're SpongeBob right now.
Right. So here, this thing.
It's true.
Yeah.
With mixed reality glasses, I can change who you are visually.
But I get it, but I'm saying let's talk about more the reality. The only reason you believe that I'm holding this phone in my hand is because the photons from this went to your eye, went through your retina, and went to the visual cortex. That's how you saw I'm holding a phone. What if this phone did not exist? And you can still see the phone there.
Yeah.
Because your mind does not know the difference, the phone is there or not there. It is simply created by our flawed mechanism, because our eyes are not actually very good. Most people won't even know what I'm wearing if they close their eyes, because you don't see through your eyes, you see through your brain. And brain can easily be fooled into having something that's not there. So the idea of reality is perceived by our brain. We can create a world where we can have just that visceral reaction to something happening as if it's happening in the real time. And that could prevent a lot of the violence, because once people see it happening, they actually shy away.
So I come from the news world, and right now I can say without a doubt that those working in the news world are having a difficult time deciphering fact from a fact from fiction, right? And it is an ongoing issue that we're trying to combat, because all of this misinformation, all of this, you know, non-reality BS is being, you know, perpetuated all over the place, confusing the electorate to the point where they're not, you know, necessarily educated or informed enough on the issues to vote responsibly. So
we have this problem in the tech industry. We're calling things mixed reality when they're not, and we're calling things VR when they're not full VR, right?
Right.
And we're confusing people on our side of the fence as well.
Okay, so talk about the responsibility of mitigating that negative impact, because there are negative impacts of technological advancements, and that's not me trying to criticize Silicon Valley. That's me saying, hey, there needs to be certain safeguards in place to make sure that these negative impacts are taken care of.
Innovation doesn't work like that. Innovation works like I talked to Doug Engelbart, who invented the mouse and invented a lot of things that we use today. And he was angry at the end of his life. And I picked up on that as a journalist talking to him, because that's what I do. I study people like Naveen and people who are changing the world. And I said, why are you so angry? You should be on top of the world right now. You created a future for us that's just much better than it was in the 50s. And he said, yeah, but I'm dreaming for 20 years from now. He was showing me gloves and talking to me about augmented reality 10 years ago.
But Anna,
and he said he got kicked out of his own R&D lab in Silicon Valley, right? because his own friends, the researchers at SRI, didn't get him because he was always thinking 20 yards ahead. He showed us basically the Macintosh in 1969, right? You go to YouTube and search the mother of all demos. He was so far ahead, and people are doing this today. We're dreaming about a new world that isn't yet here. None of us are wearing glasses, but I'm dreaming about a world where I am wearing glasses all the time.
But more than that, the technology in itself is neither good or bad. The people are good or bad. People do good things or bad things, and the technology does not do good thing or a bad thing. So to me, I want to go back and focus on, we as entrepreneurs, we need to start thinking about how entrepreneurs are really capable of becoming that superpower. So does the superpower really belong to a country, a nation state, or really to the entrepreneur? And I have really the 4 things I want to talk to you about why I am absolutely convinced that you and I and a small group of people will become the superpower. Because we are now capable of solving the problems, the big grand challenges of humanity that used to be done by the nation states. Look at the space. It's not being done by the nation states. It is a friend like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, or even I, who are landing on the moon. Is something that could only be done by the superpowers. When we land on the moon, not only we become the first private company to do so, we become the 4th superpower.
You said something backstage to me that was, I think, the quintessential essence of an entrepreneur. And you said, nothing is impossible.
That's right.
So where does that belief come from? And because that's, I think, when you sit down with Elon or Bill Gates or any of these, Mark Zuckerberg, any great entrepreneur, they have that belief. They have a belief that it can be done.
So here's the thing. The only limit you have to what you can do is your imagination. Even your mother, who loves you so much, when she says, sky is the limit to what you can do, what she does not tell you is, there is no such thing as sky. Sky is nothing but the figment of your imagination. When you go from here to the moon, you don't say, Mom, I just passed the sky. There is no sky. It just does not exist, right? So when you believe something is impossible, it becomes impossible for you, not someone else. The more people who come and tell me what you're doing is impossible, the more I know I'm the only one who has a game to myself, because no one else is competing, because they've taken themselves out of competition. So what I was saying was, today the entrepreneurs are solving healthcare problem, completely re-looking at healthcare to say, what if we can create a world where no one ever gets sick? Why do we need a healthcare system that's designed for you to be sick when you can create a system that prevents you from being sick? And that is possible today because we can learn what's happening inside our body, and the technology will allow us to constantly monitor what's happening and fix it. Second thing is, that's really important, is that we as entrepreneurs can be held responsible for our action every single day, not every election cycle. What happens in election cycle is you elect an idiot and you're stuck with that idiot for 4 years. And I'm not talking about our current president, so you know. Well, maybe I am. But the entrepreneurs can be held responsible for every day. When Uber sent the Uber, when we were all protesting against the immigrants, banning of the immigrants, guess what happened? That day, 200,000 people deleted Uber. Guess what happened? They fell in line. He quit the Obama's advisory committee, Travis, right? So people are held responsible every day. So interesting thing is, third thing is, that as an entrepreneur, you're not bound by the geographical boundaries. You find the resources wherever they are available. So us going to the moon, we didn't find a cheap rocket in US. We went to New Zealand, and we are working with a company and a great entrepreneur in New Zealand who's giving us a rocket for $4 million, not $200 million, a $4 million rocket that we can use to go to the moon at a cost of $10 million, not $25 billion that it took the government.
The costs are coming down. When I wrote my last book, putting a CubeSat in space cost $1.3 million. Today, it's what, $100,000?
Or less, because this becomes a CubeSat. Your iPhone has all the things that you need to become a CubeSat now. So you can throw an Android phone up there, and you got a CubeSat, right? The fourth thing that's really important to know is the capital is not patriotic. Capital goes wherever the opportunities are. So if you create a great opportunities, people around the world will come to support your dream. So here is my things to you. I want you to dream so big that people think you are absolutely crazy, unless if you happen to be crazy, then all bets are off. Right? Right. But really dream so big that people think it's a crazy dream. Never ever be afraid to fail. Everything is possible because you can make it possible. And the technology is at our disposal to make it.
I have to ask a question. I got to jump in. Sorry, guys. Okay, so I'm curious about where your dreams come from, though, because do the dreams come from this need to fix, certain issues that politicians either refuse to fix or can't work together to fix? Is it coming from a good place, or is it coming from, hey, I'm a businessman, I'm an entrepreneur, I see that there's a problem here, I want to fix it, and I want to profit from it? Because I think that's one of the biggest issues. It's one thing to refer to yourself, or, I mean, this talk is referred to as, the superhero complex. But a superhero saves. And one of the issues that we continuously run into with technology is, yes, the innovation is great. There's so many upsides to it. But every once in a while, you run into a pretty significant downside, like privacy issues or security issues.
Let me finish my question.
Cars
kill 30,000 people in America, and we all drive. When you have deep utility, you will take on the risk of technology. All technologies have bad.
But no one's sitting here and saying technology is bad. I'm sitting here saying, what type of safeguards do CEOs in Silicon Valley think of?
Anna, you have to listen then if you're going to be asking a question.
I've been listening this whole time.
Doing good and doing well are not mutually exclusive. The reason we entrepreneurs go out and do great things and solve the big problem, because it creates a big business. To me, the best way to solve the societal problem is to create a profitable business. Even if you are the richest man in the world, you can only do a small good until you create the scale of creating the profit that allows you to help 1 billion people. You can't help 1 billion people without creating the profit engine.
I understand that, but profitable businesses, especially in the United States, have had way more influence over our politicians and the regulation that they pass than the American people. So the best interests of the American people do get ignored in an effort to support corporate interests that maybe started with the best intentions.
No, Anna, that's not true one bit.
It is true. I work in news.
I know,
we
but
cover
my
this
point
on a daily
is,
basis.
the people in the
news...
Is
this fake news or true news?
So honestly, the news is the problem is the news has a very, anyway, I'm not going to go to the news. Who cares? It's immaterial, right? So the fact is, today the entrepreneurs are driven by a very simple thing. If I want to create a $10 billion company, I got to solve a problem that impacts 1 billion people. What is the headache that I'm trying to solve?
And the superhero is created. I was driving around the CEO of Video, which is a video conferencing system that's quite popular. And he located his business in Cupertino. And I said, why do you locate your business in Cupertino? Why not San Francisco? Why not Berlin? Why not anywhere else? Shanghai. And he said, I wanted to drive by Apple computer every morning on the way to work and know it's possible to create a monster company from nothing.
Honestly, the entrepreneurs are really driven by one thing, which is how can they go out and solve a problem that impacts 1 billion people, because they know their business depends on having these people's problem be solved. People are not going to buy my product unless I'm giving them an aspirin that solves the headache. So I have to find what the headache is. The headache is today's people are sick and tired of paying the healthcare premium they can't afford. The education system is so obsolete that it's having a chronic unemployment because our children are not taught to learn. You look at the abundance of, we should be creating the abundance of food, the abundance of energy, the abundance of land. Every single thing should be possible, so every one of us never have to fight over the basic needs, and we can create so much of it that it becomes free like oxygen.
Here's an example to take it down from Elon Musk and other people who are trying to change the world in a big way. When I worked at Microsoft, an engineer showed me an array microphone. It was a microphone that had 6 microphones and could tell where sound was coming from. And today, Pioneer released these a few months ago that have 6 microphones in them. So I'm in a snowstorm in Sundance, and the other person on the other line can hear me as good as I was in the conference room. 6 microphones built into a product. This product is never going to have a downside. It's never going to take away, well, is it going to take away your privacy?
I know, but you guys are making
blankets. It could take away your privacy.
Let me just make one quick statement. You guys are making blanket statements about technology in general. And I want everyone to understand, in case anyone misinterprets me, technology is fabulous, right? And innovation starts with the best intentions. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, every once in a while, there are certain downsides that maybe people couldn't predict. Oh. And so that's the issue that I kind of want to get to. How do you solve those problems? And is it the responsibility of Silicon Valley to solve those problems?
In my book, I have a whole chapter on downsides about augmented reality. We know there's, first of all, my wife can't wear it. She gets sick in it. Mm-hmm. That's a downside. There's teams now working on that downside. They're studying the ear and the eye syncing behavior of the brain and are finding ways to hack it so that she doesn't get sick. Right?
So the first prototype, I agree with you, when the first time the product is introduced, there are things that are not perfect. But that imperfection is what allows the next entrepreneur behind to come in and disrupt the first guy. So what I think is, it's not a technological that someone went out there and now they own the market. The technology is moving so fast. Every 5 to 10 years, the new king is being created because the old king is dead. Yeah. And here's my prediction, that the things are moving so fast that sometimes the companies that are doing the number one, like Uber, it is quite possible, in my humble opinion, in the next 5 to 10 years, before they even do an IPO, they may be dead. Because once the self-driving cars comes along, they have no advantage over creating a driver network. Because Tesla has a driver network, the GM has a driver network, because it's called the autonomous car. And suddenly, the advantage Uber has is disappeared. Come behind us, there's the next entrepreneur is going to come along. So never ever get discouraged where the things are, somebody has won. Because all you are, every time the bus goes by, there is the next bus around the corner that you can take and disrupt the first guy.
And it's technology that comes along that gets cheap and it's small, that changes products. This was created by 5 people. This is why the world is moving so fast.
That's why entrepreneurs are becoming a superpower. I can tell you that, to land on the moon under $10 million, the LiDAR used to cost $2 million. We bought it for $500 last month because it's the same thing that's being used in the autonomous car. The same technology, gyroscope, that used to cost $1 million is now pennies because it's being used in the iPhones. So point is, things are getting cheaper, better, faster. Don't lose hope. Go out and make a difference.
This camera, I can do like this, and it's steady when you watch it in VR because it's using the gyroscope out of the phone and in the camera. And it's the software that matters to products like this. This is where the iteration is coming. The teams at Facebook are changing this. This week, Facebook is going to update the live video for 360. The iteration that's happening, but we're getting off track. The people who are creating these companies are dreaming big and trying to find a problem that is so massive that it keeps them interested. Because some of these people are so crazy that they just get bored trying to solve normal everyday things.
So let's all solve a big problem. We are over time here. Please stand up and let me know that you are going to go out and solve the next big problem. Thank you very much. Come on, get up, Mike. Guys, show me. Who's going to solve the next big problem? Guys, come on. Salute the guys who are standing up here and be the next one.
All right. Thank you, guys. We are out of time, but I appreciate you watching this panel. Thank you to Robert and Naveen for an inspirational talk, to say the least. Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks very much, guys. That's what we like. Heated opinions, good debate, and that debate's going to carry on, I think, for a long time. So, next up, we have something slightly different. We're going into outer space. So, an astronaut's unlikely journey. Mike Massimino, Columbia University and Intrepid Sea, Air and Space Museum. He's a Space Shuttle and a Hubble mission veteran. He's going to come up, he's going to talk to us about his life and how he got to where he went and what's happening now. He's in conversation with Alyssa Newcomb of NBC News. Please welcome them to the stage.
Hello, thank thank you everyone for coming. I am joined today by Mike Massimino, and I am really excited because astronauts are my favorite people to talk to.
That's good.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I hope this goes well.
I hope so, too.
You know, starting out, seeing as this is a tech conference,
Mhm.
wanted to mention you were the first person to send a tweet from space.
That's right. That's I was the first guy to tweet. It was in May of 2009.
And what message did you have for us?
Yeah, so you know, I didn't get a Ghost Rider or anything, and I waited until I got to orbit to be inspired to write this thing. And so what I wrote was, launch was awesome. I'm feeling fine, because I wanted the people of Earth to know I was okay. So I said, I'm feeling fine, enjoying the spectacular views, the adventure of a lifetime has begun. So that was my first tweet. The best thing about that tweet, though, Alyssa, was that I finally had my kids pay attention to me when I was in space. They were both teenagers at the time, 13 and 16. And so, most teenagers, if their parents are going to space, they're really excited about that just to get them out of the house for a while. So I couldn't annoy them. So they were very excited about me going to space, so I wouldn't be able to annoy them. And as a result, I didn't get any email from them. You can email in space. And I wasn't getting any for a whole week. They just ignored me that I was in space. They were just like, no, we're not going to pay attention to Dad. But on that Saturday, after we launched, and I sent that tweet, they made fun of it on Saturday Night Live. Seth Meyers said, we have the first tweet from space. Mike Massimino says, launch was awesome. And he said, in 40 years, we've gone from one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, to launch was awesome. Right? That's where he left it. And he said, if we ever find life on other planets, this is how we're going to hear about it from this guy. And he showed like my little Twitter face, and it types out, geez, dudes, look, aliens. That would be it. So my kids who were ignoring me for a week write to me on that Monday afternoon. They get home from school and they write me some email. He goes, Dad, everyone at school thought it was great that they made fun of you on Saturday Night Live. Keep saying stupid stuff. So that was the best part about it. But it was exciting. It was a way to share the journey, and I think it's helped a lot. I think there's been a huge, and from what I can tell, a huge interest in space exploration, and particularly in the last few years, it's grown. I think some of it is these private companies that are doing amazing things. I think it also is the accessibility to what's happening through social media, being able, just about every astronaut now tweets from space. All of us do. Then when they're in space, what they're going through their training, they Instagram, they do all those things, and I think it helps share that journey. So it's like when I was a little kid, the astronauts were like these superheroes. You didn't know what they were. They were up there, and these people you would want to be like, but couldn't figure out how to do that. But now I think we're much more accessible, and the whole space program is shared because of social media. I think it's a great thing.
Now, you were also one of the rare few who, dare I mention this, gained weight in space.
I did. I gained, and that was, I think we have these photos here that, we get the photos up? We have a photo of me eating in space, I think, here.
Mike with a
That's
biscotti.
Yeah. They can hear us in the back? We got any photos coming?
In the meantime, though,
Okay, in the meantime,
tell us about your favorite dish in space.
So what happened, it was, most people lose weight in space,
You would
right?
think.
Yeah, because you're kind of busy, and, you may not have as much, your body goes through a lot of changes, and I didn't have, you kind of lose your appetite a little bit. But what happened with me was I was like that for the first couple days, and then after the spacewalk started going, and I started feeling more relaxed about being in space, my appetite kicked in. So I started like chowing down, and the space food's pretty good. Has anyone had the space ice cream? Has anyone tried that stuff? Do you like that stuff? That stuff's disgusting. The reason you can buy that in the museums, okay, that's me spacewalking, I think. Let's see. All right, let's go back a couple here. That's me eating, okay? So that's me eating in space. So the reason you can get that ice cream in the visitor center is because astronauts will refuse to eat that stuff. So there's so much of it left over that they sell it to people. We have that available to us, but none of us select it. We have much better desserts. We have chocolate fudge cake, and you can have M&Ms and cookies and really good stuff. And it's so easy to cook this stuff. The macaroni and cheese, you just add some water, and it's all ready to go. Shrimp cocktail.
Shrimp cocktail.
You have shrimp cocktail, so that's very popular. So the food was really good, and what happened was I got back from my first flight, and you go through a physical. They check, see how you're doing, check your heart out, and your balance is okay, and all that. And then, of course, that part of a regular physical is they weigh you. And they were astonished that I gained weight. It was like, oh my God, they were so excited, the doctors, and it was like, oh my God, he gained weight. You know, I'm only the second guy that I know of that happened to. So.
And did you ever get sick in space, though? I imagine it's kind of a feast for the senses.
Yeah, just like that food that you saw, and we lost the photo here, but just like that food that comes down, it also sometimes goes in the other direction, unfortunately. And yeah, so your body goes through a lot of changes trying to figure out what's happening. And one of the things that happens is that because you're weightless and you're floating there, your vestibular system is also floating. That's what gives us our sense of up and down, and when we're moving in motion, it all works on gravity. So when you don't have gravity, your vestibular system is floating and saying you are perfectly still. So sometimes, like if you're in a bouncy ride, or in a car, or if you get motion sick at some point, it's a conflict between your senses, right? So for me, it happens sometimes, and I now live in New York City, and if I'm in a bumpy car ride going through Manhattan, and I'm trying to read my phone or read something, my eyes are telling me that I'm stable reading, but my vestibular system is getting a good workout saying I'm moving, and that conflict sometimes can lead to a little motion sickness, right? So, and the same can happen on a boat, or things where you're moving around unusually sometimes can lead to a conflict. So in space, it happens the same reaction for the opposite reason. As you're moving around, your eyes are saying you're moving around the spacecraft, but your vestibular system is saying you're perfectly still. It's not getting any inputs. And so that leads to that conflict, which also can lead to nausea. So I barfed my first day in space. You have really good barf bags, which is good. These are high-tech vomit bags, so work really well. You always want to have two, because once you do that once, you don't want to open it up and do it again. Yeah. So you seal that thing, that's never going to be opened again, and you get another one ready. So, but it's all due to some of the changes that the body is going to. After the first day, though, you generally feel much better, and I did. And then, the next morning I felt fine. My second flight, I had absolutely no symptoms. So, your brain adapts, which is an amazing thing. Is how your brain can interpret what's happening and adapt to that situation. And it may take it a little bit of time, but eventually it adapts, and you're fine.
And you are not only an astronaut in real life, but you also played one on TV. You were on The Big Bang Theory.
I was.
I believe we have that.
We have a shot of that too, I think, coming up here. We have a slide of that, if they can show that. There we go. There I am on the right. So we have any Big Bang Theory fans out there?
Yeah? All right.
All right. Not as many as I thought. I thought there would be. No, so yeah, I got a chance to not only fly in space, but also to portray one on television, be one on TV. But yeah, that was a fun thing to do. That's me on the right, and Pasha Lynchikov, my buddy in the middle, is an actor who played the Russian cosmonaut, and then on the left is Simon Helberg, who plays Wolowitz on the show. But again, it was just another way to to share the experience of space travel, and it was just a really fun experience.
And you're actually afraid of heights. I was surprised to learn that. So how the heck do you spacewalk?
Yeah, so I have a fear of height. Like, even, I like staying this far away from the edge of the stage. I do not like heights. And I realized this when I was at a very young age. I dreamt about being an astronaut because I saw Neil Armstrong walk on the moon, and I was 6 years old when that happened. And anyone who was alive at that time knows where they were, and it was a big event. But for me, it was something a little more special. I just thought this was the greatest thing ever. And I wanted to be like my heroes who were walking on the moon. But then I realized by the time I was about 8 or 9, a few years later, that I wasn't one of those guys. I was pretty much a scrawny, scared kid who couldn't see very well and was scared of heights. So I kind of wrote off the astronaut thing as not being a possibility. And I still don't like heights. But I wanted to be an astronaut. So when I graduated college and I wanted to get more involved with the space program, I wanted to try to be an astronaut, even though it sounded like a crazy idea and I wasn't sure how suited I was for it. My things like being afraid of heights, I had to deal with it. I don't know if you ever really overcome things like that, but you learn how to deal with it. And it doesn't really affect me in space or even in an airplane, because when you look out the side of an airplane, you don't feel like you're going to fall out of it. I don't like the idea of looking over the side of a building. That's not for me. I don't like that. But in space, because you're so far away from the planet, your perspective is so different. I never really felt like I was going to fall and hit the planet or I was in any danger. But it did get me on my first spacewalk. I was on the robot arm going up high on the telescope, and the payload bay was about 60 feet below. So now I had a reference that my brain recognized. You know, now I'm looking over the edge of something, and the robot arm kind of moves, just shakes around a little bit, you know. So I'm like getting shook around, and I'm looking down, and I felt like I could fall. And even though I knew I was weightless and I was in space, and it was obvious I was in space when I was wearing a spacesuit, I knew that in my brain I was like, no, you can't really, but that primal fear took over. Yeah. So I felt the need to hold on to something. I didn't want to say, hey, you know, I didn't want to tell my crewmates I was, you know, scared. So what I did is I grabbed my power tool and I held it, and I felt like I was holding on to something, and then the fear went away. So you learn how to, it sounds ridiculous, but other astronauts have had the same experience. If they're high off with a reference to something below them, like the shuttle payload bay, you know, the reaction is you want to hold on. And even though you know that there's no danger there, you're not gonna drop, you still have this need to hold on to something. And for whatever reason, that helps you relax, like you're holding on. And it's little things like that. And there's a lot of fear that might have learned, and you just have to figure out a way to get around it so you can do your job.
And that EVA suit that you put on before you go outside into space to do whatever it is you're working on.
Yeah, I think we got a shot of that too.
We do.
If you get the next slide up.
You were telling me that water, if something goes wrong, can actually come into the suit.
Yeah, the spacesuit it's older technology. Let's see if we can get it up there. I see it in front of us here. If we can put that next slide up on the screen. Shot of the suit. But the spacesuit is really a miraculous device. It was, and there it is. That's me looking during my first spacewalk, trying to look like I'm calm, and you can see the Earth in my visor there. But the most expensive part of the spacesuit is the life support system that you wear on your back, and that was designed for the very first shuttle flights back in the early 1980s, designed back in the 1970s, and we still use these same life support systems. We had. After the Columbia accident, we lost a couple on that shuttle flight. We had 12 remaining, and we have about 10 that can still be used. And they're miraculous. They're very expensive, very intricate, small miniaturization parts. And part of it is a pump that can pump water to a cooling garment you're wearing. It also pumps air to over your head, a vent duct that comes in over your head, to provide fresh air so you can breathe that. It also separates water from the air and air from the water, because sometimes you can get air inside your water system, and some water as you breathe out, you're going to get some water into your air, and it gets filtered and carbon dioxide comes out. But this one pump kind of handles that. It's the only thing you hear. It's a pump fan separator assembly, and that's the only thing you hear when you're spacewalking. It's very quiet. Whatever comes in over your headset, of course, you'll hear that. Your voice sounds a lot different because you're at a lower pressure, 4.3 psi. Sound travels. There's not as many molecules in front of your face. You can't whistle while you're working when you're in space. So your voice sounds much deeper. You can hear what's coming in over your headset, and you hear that fan noise humming in the background. And that's it. You can bang on stuff, you won't hear it. It's like really quiet and somewhat peaceful. And you want to hear that fan noise because you know the suit is working. But we had a malfunction of that, and after all these years, or just a couple years ago, of this thing working perfectly, we had a mixing of the air and the water. That separator wasn't working quite like it should during a spacewalk. And my friend Luca Parmitano, who's an Italian astronaut, when the air was being delivered over his head, it also delivered water over his head, and it started to pool, and a lot of water was started to accumulate right around his face, and he did have the possibility of drowning. It's probably the closest we've come to killing someone during a spacewalk, but luckily they aborted the spacewalk, and he was able to come in safely.
And you have spent so many nights in space. How do you get a good night's sleep? I hear you can do it on the ceiling.
We have a picture of that, if they can get that advance the slide. There I am. You'll hopefully see this in a second here. So one of the cool things you have, there we go. So one of the cool things about sleeping in space on the shuttle, you could sleep anywhere you wanted pretty much. I slept on the ceiling a couple nights. There I am. I'm on the left, sleeping on the wall, and I got a sleep mask on, and I've got a strap around my head, which I think is kind of interesting. When they teach you how to do everything in space, and one of the things is they teach you how to set up your bedroll and what you need to get a good night's rest, and that strap around my head is actually keeping my head against the pillow. one of the things that we've learned to do is sleep with something behind our head, because we sleep usually with a pillow or something, our head against something. And when you're floating in space, I've actually sometimes just kind of dozed off taking a nap, just kind of floating there. But we're used to having something behind our heads. And so to try to get a good night's sleep, it works better if we have a pillow behind our head. But when you're in space, your head will float off of that pillow. So by putting this strap, it kind of keeps the pillow on your head. And as you have that thing, you feel that behind your head, and you feel more comfortable that way. So that's, even though you're kind of floating there, we still like to have a pillow. And the only way you're going to get it to work is to strap it to your head. So that's what I've done there. There's some background noise, so you wear earplugs as well. And what we're doing is kind of like, you can see there's my buddy Mike Good, and then I think Megan MacArthur was on the right of that photo. That's her hand there. So he's kind of like a slumber party. That's the way it was on the space shuttle. You set up your sleeping bag wherever you want to go to bed. It's like a big slumber party. With the space station, because they're up there for so long, my friends are up there, Peggy Whitson, for example, and Jack Fisher are up there now, 2 Americans along with a couple cosmonauts and a French astronaut. They each have their own little bedroom. It's kind of like a closet where they have their sleeping bag permanently set up, and they can have pictures of their family and a computer. And it's like a closet. It looks like a closet, but it's an actual little crew quarters for them to sleep in. But it's very relaxing. Once you get used to it, first couple of nights, I felt a little funny. Again, your body going through changes. Your spine elongates. And I felt that at night you actually grow in the spine about 1.5 inches. You lose that when you come back to Earth. It does hurt. It's uncomfortable. And you're like, what's going on? And you know what it is. And you're like, oh, yeah, right, they told me about this. And it's a little lower back pain. But after the first couple of nights, you get used to this. And the pain goes away. Your spine stabilizes. And the nausea and all that is gone. And it's just great. You just float there. It's like the greatest waterbed you've ever been in. You're just very relaxing. Even though you're inside the sleeping bag, you're kind of floating within it. And it's the best way to sleep.
And I believe we have a photo of you as a kid.
Yeah.
So if we could pull up the photo of Little Mass.
Right.
I wanted to ask, how did that kid get to where he is right now? I mean, that program is so competitive.
It is. And that's me dressed up like my hero Neil Armstrong about 2 days after the moon landing. So what happened there is I wanted to dress up and play astronaut in the backyard. So my mom converted my elephant costume. That's actually a gray elephant costume from the first grade play. I was an elephant. And my mom cut off the tail and made it into an astronaut costume. And I had no one to play with in my neighborhood, apparently, growing up. So I had my Snoopy was my co-pilot. So I would have astronaut adventures with Snoopy in the backyard. But that's what I dreamt about doing when I was a little guy. And when you're little, everything's possible. But by the time, as I said earlier, by the time I got to be 8 or 9, I realized that the idea of me becoming an astronaut was just preposterous. It was impossible. It's like trying to become a superhero. I wasn't the type to do that. But when I got out of college, it wasn't until I was an adult, I got out of college and I was working, I dreamt about trying to become an astronaut again. I realized that whether or not I wanted to deny it, my passion, like I know this is a room full of passionate people that have different passions. My passion was the space program, and I had to do something about it. So I went to grad school, and I started applying. I got rejected 3 times. One of the times I was medically disqualified, so I had to get that reversed before I could even apply again. And on my 4th try, I got picked. And I'm going to show, if you can show the next slide of me with, that's me with my Snoopy. You'll see coming out. That's me with Snoopy in space. That's my same Snoopy. But I realized that becoming an astronaut, when I was in grad school, I remember seeing I was watching television, it was the news, and the astronauts were floating around. And I said to myself, that's exactly what I want to do. And then there was a voice in the back of my head that said, but you will never get a chance to do that. That'll never happen. And that was the reality of it, is that I thought it was impossible, but it really wasn't. It was just unlikely. There's a difference between something being impossible and something being unlikely. The probability of me becoming an astronaut was probably 0.0000, a lot of zeros and a 1 at the end. And the only way something truly becomes impossible is if you give up. Once you give up, that 1 at the end of those zeros, for all of you that are developing these wonderful things, these dreams, these passions you're following, maybe it's unlikely. Maybe it's probably better chances than me becoming an astronaut. But there's always that 1 out there somewhere. And the only way that 1 becomes a 0 is if you give up. As long as you don't give up, there's always a chance. And that's what I kept in mind, and it finally worked out.
Great. Well, that is unfortunately all the time we have. I could go on for hours and hours, but Mike will be signing books after this, so you can ask him whatever you want, like what space smells like, maybe.
Yeah, I can answer that one.
But thank you so much for coming.
Thanks. Thank you for coming.
Okay, hi everyone. So just to repeat that, so Mike Massimino is doing a Q&A, just at the Q&A stage, which is literally just outside center stage here, and he's going to be signing some books. So if you've got any more questions for him, if he didn't get to anything that you'd like covered, then it's just outside here, the Q&A stage, just outside center. So, okay, moving on. So we're going to change direction a little bit here into marketing and image. So entertainment shopping for all is the next talk up. We've got Alan Schaff from Imager. We've got Susie Deering from eBay. They're going to be talking about the future of advertising, how we reach the new demographics. Traditional advertising has obviously been completely upended. How's that going to work in the future? So with Alan and Susie, they're in conversation with JP Magdalenen from Yahoo Finance. Please welcome them on stage.
Well, thanks for the introduction. Again, I'm JP Magdalenen for Yahoo Finance, and I'm joined by Susie Deering, Chief Marketing Officer of eBay, and Alan Schaff, CEO and founder of Imager. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Over the next 20-25 minutes, we'll be talking about entertainment and shopping for all, aka democratization of marketplaces. And who better to talk about that really than Susie and Alan, who help run and/or run two of the largest marketplaces today. So, what I love about you two is you both run two really well-established marketplaces, but with different audiences in mind. And so I'd love to hear from your perspective, what are the challenges you both encounter in reaching your audiences, especially in a day and age where we're very cross-platform?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying that the biggest challenge that we have from an eBay perspective is, number one, engaging with new audiences and going out and finding. We have very loyal customers that come to eBay, but for us, it's really about how do we open up our marketplace and take it where they are. And because we know that the only way to really start to expand is to make sure that we aren't feeling like that we're keeping the goodness of eBay just at eBay, that we can unleash it and make sure that we're pushing it out, which is, again, a good reason as to why we have a great partnership like we do with Imager.
Yeah, so Imager is one of the largest entertainment destinations for millennials on the internet. And so we help brands solve some of their advertising challenges with reaching that audience and really speaking to them in their language around the topics that they know and love and making a really authentic advertising experience for them.
Got it. Well, let me briefly back that up, because I'm both well aware that eBay has what is the latest stat on eBay users? Hundreds of millions of monthly users, correct?
Yes.
And the same goes for you, Imager, and
Yeah.
Alan. Okay,
Yeah.
terrific. What does engagement sort of look like? I imagine mobile is a huge proponent.
Yeah. I mean, for us, mobile is huge, and it has been since, we really were one of the first innovators when it came to mobile. Just to kind of put it in perspective, when we released our earnings in Q1, we announced that over 60% of our purchases are informed in one way or another with mobile. And so it's not like, oh, sometime it'll get there. It's there and it's happening. So mobile is extremely important, which means that we also have to think differently about how we're going to show up in that space and to really engage it in the right way and not just think that it's the same thing that you're going to do from a desktop or from, a kind of what we would do in our marketplace on the desktop side. We've got to make sure from how we show up is differently. Same thing with our partners. We can't just treat it like it's a one-size-fits-all.
I think that's, sorry, Alan, what did you say?
Well, so for us, you were talking about platforms and different engagement on different platforms. So Imager actually started as a desktop site for a very desktop-focused use case, which is you upload an image and then you share it out. And so then, of course, over time, we built up our own network, and you can share within the Imager network, and you can create these posts and stories and share with our own community. And so about maybe 3 years ago, the world started, well, that's when we noticed and we raised money in order to accomplish it, but it was very clear that the world was moving mobile. And now, like, the world is mobile. Like, we're here, it's been mobile for a while. And so we see that, basically, we have this great delta between what the engagement we saw on desktop and now the engagement we see on mobile, and it's just all about mobile. Like, pick your favorite engagement action, whether it's like registration or views on the images, or votes or comments or literally anything, creating posts. The vast majority of that for us now is all on mobile. So it turns out that people are just far more engaged on mobile, and that works perfectly for advertising because they look at more things, they do more things on Imager and on these platforms. So it's like, if you're not on mobile and you're not speaking the language of the platform, then you are at a huge disadvantage.
Yeah, I think I read a stat yesterday that, and I think the stat actually may be higher in my household, given that I have a 17-year-old and 14-year-old, so I think they probably blow this stat away. But, I think that they're saying that Gen Z is actually spending over 3.5 hours a day on their phones, on their mobile devices. And, again, I feel like that it's more than that, but I guess there is a time that they're at school, so maybe, hopefully, they aren't really. But, I think the other thing that we're going to have to start to think about is you can't just even call it all mobile, because now mobility has expanded so much.
I mean, like tablets, watches, wearable devices versus your phone?
Well, and even look what's happening with cars, and look at what's happening within your own home. So I think that that's the other part for us, is that we're going to have to start to think about how do we break that up and think about mobile in a very different way. And I'm going to be a little controversy in the sense to say we've actually seen a resurgence in our desktop. And when I say desktop, it's because look at our laptops. Mac Airs are very tiny. I mean, if you are sitting around my household, there's a mobile device being your phone, and we're sitting with our Macs on our lap while we're watching TV, while we're talking, or whatever. So I think that, again, those are the things that we're going to have to kind of, I feel like that's fascinating and fantastic, because it just means that we have more outlets to kind of think about how we're going to engage and make that connection.
Got it. Well, Susie, I did want to follow up on this. This is for both of you. It's like, how do you, it's erroneous now to think of mobile as just one bucket. And Susie, you also said something controversial backstage. It's perhaps erroneous to think about, and we reporters love to do this, we love to break out our demographics into ages. I'm on the cusp of the coveted 18 to 34 demographics, which I'm going to hold on to for as long as I can. But you see it differently. Alan, I'd love to hear from you as well. Talk more about that.
Yeah, I see it differently. Number one, anytime that we put a term like millennial on a segment that is a third of the population, all of a sudden doesn't feel very segment-ish to me. I think the other part is that we've talked about demographics because, frankly, that's where the currency and exchange happens on the media buying side. And really, for me, it's about attitudes. It's about interests. It's about your personality and your behaviors. It really is less about truly an age. Because where you may be on the cusp of 18 to 34, I'm way past that. I'd like to believe that I still act that way maybe at times. But, there's interests there that are, I think, really what we need to engage with and think about differently, and not necessarily just pin it down. And I'm really disappointed in the industry that we've kind of taken that lazy way and a lazy approach, that we just go back to our, frankly, TV buying days and make everything be more about, age-based versus really about finding those audiences that have interest and likability amongst each other.
Yeah. So the point about being a lazy marketer, I think, is fantastic. Because what doesn't work so well is taking one advertisement and sort of blasting it out through all of the internet. And I know that I think 80% of all of the advertising revenue is spent on like Google and Facebook. And however, there are all these other more verticalized places where users are really engaging. One of them is actually Imager.
Yep.
And our kind of sweet spot is in what we call the geek millennial.
What's the geek millennial?
So I'm a geek. And a geek is no longer, we actually have done surveys and we have like data around this. We know that that it's no longer a negative term, right? It just means that somebody is really passionate about their interests. And so I happen to be like a video game geek. I love sci-fi, I love technology, I love programming. Those are all the same interests that our user base on Imager has. And so if you want to reach these people, which they actually happen to be extremely influential, right? These are sort of the people that are creating comments throughout the internet. They're leaving reviews. They're actually the content creators of the internet. Like, you want to be able to reach them. And so we help brands be able to do that. We actually call it localizing a brand's message and a brand's content, localizing it to the Imager language. Because we're an online community, and communities have their own history, they have their own culture, they have their own just social norms and language. And you can't be like one of those brands that just like comes into one of these places, like you've got like maybe an older guy coming into a high school with like a backwards cap being like, hello, fellow kids. Like that doesn't work. Like you can't be a brand that speaks to an audience like that. It comes off as so inauthentic and does not work. And so we provide a way for brands to take whatever message they want to send and turn it into a way that is really receptive for our users by actually creating the content, creating all the descriptions and literally the language, creating the ad for the brand.
Is there one or two examples, successful examples that you could comfortably talk about?
Yeah, so...
And one's going to be eBay for sure.
We do this quite a bit for eBay.
Yes.
So there's a great example. There's some kind of weird cultural thing on Imager where if you create a post that is somewhat longer, like maybe, I don't know, plus 10 images or so, that, it takes you like maybe a minute to like scroll through this. You got to really consume it. And then you get to the end, and usually there will be what the user base calls a cat tax.
A what tax?
A cat tax.
A cat tax.
So it's like, you basically, when you create one of these longer posts, you have to pay a tax back to the community in the form of a cat picture or, a cute GIF or something like that. Like, hey, like, thanks for sticking with me.
Oh, wait, this is like a legit, literal cat tax.
Oh, this is actually like you got to pay the cat tax in order to create these longer posts. So we do this for eBay all the time. It's like one of my favorite eBay posts was one of the first ones I think that we did for you.
A drone.
Which is it was about drones.
Yep.
This is fascinating for me, but we created this post. I think it had around 10 or so images all about drones. So like here's the highest flying drone. Here's the fastest drone. Here's the drone with the best camera. Here's the drone that you just let go of it and it just does its thing. Like here's the smallest drone. Here's the drone that'll follow you around when you're on your skateboard. And it was just super cool. And of course you can buy them all on eBay. And then also here's a cat. Because because there's already 10 drones here. You already like consumed all this stuff. So like eBay's paying the cat tax.
Can you talk about? That's obviously a successful example. How successful was it?
The engagement was fantastic, but besides the engagement, the comments. Because remember, again, it goes back to that community and those interests. And for us, it paid off in the sense that it's not an ad, it's us educating. It's us about taking, we have that spectrum of choice to say, hey, we don't have just one drone type, we have several. So being able to put that there, but then also to make sure that we were getting the information back. I think that one had about 800 posts, and the comments that were coming back were phenomenal. One, it absolutely helped. We did some even research to kind of show, like, did it help with purchase intent? Do we help build the brand? Because let's face it, eBay's got to reinvent. We've got to make sure that we put ourselves and make it more relevant. And that was a great example of where we do that because it is so in our DNA. We are human. We are a real and authentic marketplace. And that was a great example of being able to take who our brand is and what we stand for, but at the same time, we were still selling those drones, but we were doing it in a way that actually meant something to people versus it just being, you want this, you really want this, versus right? You really, really, really want this, and annoying them. So I think that, for us, we find that to be extremely successful. The other key thing is that it also means that for me, eBay doesn't have to have all the answers as to how to connect to that audience. We need to look at our partners to tell us how to do that. And I think, again, maybe that gets a little scary for some advertisers, which you got to release yourself from that. You've got to lean in on those folks who are, obviously Imager's doing something right? They're listening to their localization of those communities, and if something doesn't feels out of sorts, they're going to kick it out. I want to learn from that. Why would I want to run from that?
Yeah. See, the point is that you have to create value with your advertisements. And you said something that was really interesting, like it wasn't even an ad. Right? It didn't feel like an ad. It looked like any other post on Imager. It actually gave value to the user in the form of information that really speaks to that demographic. And I didn't buy a drone because
there's still time. We
but
still have many.
It's like I'm super glad that I now have all this information because that's the kind of stuff that I like. And so it didn't feel like an ad at all. And so we started doing our promoted posts with a really strong belief that in order for the advertisements to be successful, or for promoted posts to be successful, or just advertising in general on imagery to be successful, first it has to be successful for the user. And if they get value out of that, right, that success means that they get value out of it in the form of it makes them laugh, they get some really valuable information from it, it's somehow insightful. Once that value is there, then in turn it'll be successful for the advertiser.
Got it. Another question for you, Alan. That's obviously a successful example. Not every advertising effort is going to be successful. Is there an example of an advertising effort, a promoted post that did not go according to plan, so to speak?
And this was not eBay. Oh my goodness.
It was not eBay. I won't say the specific brand, but there was one brand that frankly didn't want to listen to our advice. And we have a small creative team that their whole purpose is to create these advertisements on behalf of the brand. And they didn't want to listen to the advice of this team.
And this is for promoted posts?
Yes, it's for promoted posts.
Okay.
So, they were more or less arrogant because they thought that they had the answers. They knew how to speak to our audience better than we knew how to speak to our audience. And they were just really strong about sending the exact message using the exact language that they wanted to send. And what they ended up doing was creating themselves a series of these GIFs that were a little bit kind of awkward. They didn't really know how to create GIFs either. And then they put them up on Imager and thought that, oh, these GIFs are going to be awesome, that our users are going to reshare these GIFs kind of all over the internet. And of course, that doesn't happen. You don't just put bad GIFs on Imager and just expect them all over the internet.
Go viral, right?
And so, moral of the story is that they did not speak to the user in a way that was receptive, and it didn't work.
Got it. I want to talk a little bit, Susie, I want to talk a little bit more about, and obviously Imager plays a large role in this idea of eBay reinventing itself. eBay continues to report strong, positive, upward turning earnings. But talk about how eBay is trying to go where the fish are, so to speak, go where the users are, and reach out to them with compelling, authentic sort of messaging.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been at eBay almost 2 years, and what brought me there is what just energizes me every single day, which was you have this company that's almost 22 years old, and it was the inventor of a marketplace, which everybody's trying to now be, right? And so you go, okay, well, we kind of almost feel old, which is funny to say, being that we're only 22, but we feel kind of old in that
tech,
space.
Right,
and that's actually how we almost kind of personified ourselves. We lost a little bit of our mojo, if you will, where we weren't putting new messages and really starting to tell all the great work that we were doing at eBay out into the market. We weren't engaging with our users. We weren't talking about, hey, here's what's new and what we've innovated on. And so in the last 2 years, we've been really dedicated on really, frankly, breaking down perception barriers. People still think of us as auction, yet that is a super duper small portion of what we stand for. And what we did is we went back to our roots. We went back to the fact that us, and and I love this because our CEO says this all the time, Devin, he says, the world doesn't need another Amazon, they need a better eBay. Because for us, we're not competing in all of the same places that Amazon is, and we're perfectly fine with that. But what's really important for us as eBay is that at the core, we are about being human. We are about real. We're spirited. We've got, we got a dependability there that we just need to express ourselves differently. Also, I would say to anybody here from an advertiser, or if you get into kind of programmatic discussions, one thing that eBay did extremely well, and frankly, I think, again, probably made it the way, set kind of a standard for it, was programmatic. But programmatic can become very problematic if you lose your heart and you don't go find partners like we do with Imager and others that can truly be the spirit of who you are, that's relevant to those audiences, and go try and capture new audiences versus just trying to constantly get more and more out of your existing users.
So how did the partnership with Imager sort of come about?
Well, I mean, it started actually about almost 3.5 years ago or 4 years ago. So it was before my time of joining eBay, but it was because of that. I mean, I've also got to hand it to eBay in the sense that we're on 19 social networks, and we treat every single one of those networks extremely different. And, you know, it's everything from a Facebook, yes, the big ones, to the really engaging and niche partners like Imager. And the key for us is not to water that down and try and, again, do what Alan was talking about, which is that one-size-fits-all approach. But I think that when we came to Imager and continue to do every single day, it's reinventing with them, not us coming to them and saying, this is what we'll give them what our problems are that we need to solve, but they help become a partner in solving that.
Alan, from your perspective, I mean, one of the things you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis is around localization, the challenges around localization and engaging really with your audience. Can you talk about the challenges you face on that front? You mentioned the eBay example, for example.
Yeah, so one challenge is due to just the way that Imager works. So when you go onto Imager, you see the best stuff on the platform. And the best stuff is really good. It'll have maybe 20,000 points or like votes on it. It'll have thousands of comments. It'll have like 500,000 views. And so like what other platform can you just like post something to as a regular user and get like 500,000 views on your content? And so the stuff that is on the front page or in the most viral section, as we call it, is just really freaking good. And so the challenge that we have is that we are now inserting these promoted posts into that stream of amazing content. And so when you go from like one post to the next post to the next post as you're kind of swiping through, you will eventually land on a promoted post. And the challenge is that has to be just as good of all the posts next to it. Like the bar for that quality of content is super high. We don't want you to, as a user, to go from good post to good post to good post to bad post, and it happens to be promoted, then good, 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 then bad because it's another promoted one. And so we have to basically constantly create posts that are just as good as organic ones that get voted up through the community.
What is the user sort of feedback looking like with regards to promoted posts and that sort of organic nature? Because I remember, I'm a big Instagram user, for instance. I remember when Instagram rolled out ads, everyone's freaking out about that, for instance. From an Imager perspective, you know, you have very loyal users. What was the feedback looking like from them?
Yeah, so over time, or I should say in the beginning, the quality was always there. But because the advertising format of the promoted post was new, users were kind of like, oh, what is this? Oh, this is promoted now. Oh, Imager has like promoted content. That was maybe like 2 or so years ago. Mm-hmm. And so over time, now it's just, yeah, Imager has promoted posts, like obviously, for users. And the feedback that you see in the comments is actually like, it feels like a lie as I say it, but like people actually love it. And it's not a lie at all. They actually do love it. Because how many other platforms out there do users love the advertisements on it? There's like maybe like a small handful, but it exists on Imager. And I think we've completely changed the way that Imager thinks and looks at eBay, for example. In the comments, you see that people want more eBay posts. For a while, we only had promoted posts on desktop, and we literally had a couple of people email in and tweet at us about like, hey, why can't I see the eBay posts on mobile?
Really?
Because that product, it didn't exist yet on mobile. We had to build it. We built it first for desktop. So they literally asked for it on mobile. And there's also like a joke where eBay is my eBay, like spelled E-B-A-E.
Okay, I've never heard that before.
It exists, trust me.
I feel so old.
It is a thing.
Like it's,
okay.
It's been the feedback loop that you're talking about has been really positive.
Got it.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that really quick is, number one, keep it real. 2, it's authentic to it, but at the same time, you know, it isn't about advertising. It's about the connection and the engagement and adding that value that Alan talked about.
Terrific. Well, that was my last question, so thank you very much. My big thanks to Susie Deering of eBay and Alan Schaff of Imager. Thank you both for lending your insight and time today.
Thanks.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Yeah. Great.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our morning sessions. The stage will now break for lunch with talks resuming at 2:15 p.m. sharp. Thank you.